I want to call the meeting to order. I'm Laura Alarcon, Chief of the Bureau of Security Investigative Services. Please be advised that this meeting is going to be conducted in accordance with the agenda for the meeting as noticed. However, based on approval by the committee, any item may be taken out of agenda order. Additionally, this meeting is being webcast via the internet. The webcast can be accessed via the BSIS homepage at bsis.ca.gov. However, due to circumstances beyond the committee's control, there may be parts that may be preempted. I don't anticipate at this time that there's going to be such scheduling conflicts, but I just want to give the advisory in case somebody's watching and it suddenly is discontinued. So I want to start with item 2 on the agenda, which is the introduction and swearing in of our new advisory committee member, Stanton Pettis, by Chief Deputy Director Jeff Mason. Mr. Pettis is being appointed to a public member position on the committee. He brings a wealth of law enforcement knowledge and experience. Notably, Mr. Pettis previously served as chief with the California Highway Patrol. He also served as the California Highway Patrol's incident commander and managed a couple of law enforcement outreach centers and all community police programs. He's also served as a community college instructor where he's taught courses on police-community relations and criminal justice and homeland security. We look forward to having Mr. Pettis' wealth of knowledge brought to the committee. So if you could step down below to the dais, and Mr. Mason, if you could come up. Again, this is Chief Deputy Director Jeff Mason who will be swearing in Mr. Pettis. If you guys can come to the front so that it will be on camera. Congratulate Mr. Pettis. And thank you, Mr. Mason, for giving your time this morning. We're going to give it a minute for some signatures, and then I'm going to go ahead and call the roll. Okay, moving on to agenda item 3, we would like to call the roll for the purpose of establishing a quorum.
Simon Cruz.
Here.
Marcel Egley. Sandy Harden.
Here.
Matthew Lujan.
Here.
Aaron Riley Parker. Kim Westfall. Todd Inglis.
Here.
Lynn Moorfield.
Here.
Nancy Mirisch. Dan Perez.
We have 7 members present. We have a quorum. I would like to begin then the meeting. Oh, the official start time for the meeting is 10:07. So first, before moving on to item 4, I would like to take a minute for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you all could please stand. Okay, we're right on time. So item 4 of the agenda is to review and approve the minutes from our July 7, 2016 meeting. Do I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Thank you. Does the committee at this time have any questions or comments regarding the meeting minutes? Do we have any comments from the public regarding the meeting minutes that have been posted on the website? Seeing none, the motion is to adopt the minutes for the April 7th, 2016 meeting. Please call the vote.
Simon Cruz.
Aye.
Marcel Egley. Sandy Harden.
Aye.
Matthew Lujan.
Aye.
Todd Inglis.
Aye.
Lynn Moorfield.
Aye.
Stan Perez.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion has passed. So moving on to item 5, which is my welcoming remarks as well as news and updates that's been happening at the Bureau. Before I get started on that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping because I did notice that the women's restroom across the hall, which is normally which we use, is closed right now for maintenance. So anybody who needs to use a restroom, you will have to go to a woman's restroom, I should say, will have to either go to the second floor of this side of the building or across the breezeway. If we could take a minute too for Bureau staff present here at the meeting to stand up and introduce themselves and say what position they serve in the Bureau.
My name is Andrea Daly, and I'm the Bureau's ombudsman.
I'm Adrian Avithia. I'm the Bureau's an analyst with the policy analyst with the Bureau.
And of course, on my right is our counsel, Sheila Barker. So, in regards to updates, in licensing, we have on average been receiving about 16,000 to 16,500 applications. This constitutes both initial and renewal applicants monthly. In addition, we continue to receive about 500 to 600 plus address changes, name changes, and requests for duplicate licenses. The general average processing time for a paper employee applicant, and that includes security guards, locksmith employees, alarm agents, and the proprietary private security officers, is 60 days. However, that caveat for that 60 days is that the application has to be complete, which means all requirements of the application is satisfied, as well as error-free. And unfortunately, our paper apps for employees run about 25% deficiency rate. So 1 out of 4 applications requires the Bureau to do additional work to get the individual license and a deficiency letter issued. Once we receive the new information on a deficiency, it generally takes the Bureau about 2 to 3 weeks to process that. And I know for many employers, the question is, when is my employee going to get registered? And a lot of that is contingent upon working with them to make sure the application is complete accurately. In contrast, the average processing time for a Bsis application for an employee and this individual has no criminal history background and there has been no data entry, and I don't want to call them errors, we call them exceptions, between how the LifeScan operator has entered the personal identifier information for the applicant, and that includes the name, and how the applicant has portrayed that information on the application. If all of that aligns, we can get an employee applicant issued in a week. Unfortunately, our exception rate for these type Bsis applications run between 15 to 20%. And these are situations outside the Bureau's control. These are situations that the applicant or the employer can assist the applicant when going through the LifeScan process, when completing the application, to make sure that everything is in alignment with what's on the LifeScan document and what's on the application. When we encounter a Bsis exception, because it's not linking, the fingerprints are not automatically linking, it generally takes us 60 to 70 days to identify that that is an exception, primarily because the first round, usually within the first 15 to 20 days, the reasons for not linking could be because of a delay. FBI may not have the information and we've received a delay notice. It also may involve the applicant that their fingerprints were rejected. So because of the substantive workload that's associated with working exceptions, we generally wait about 60 days to allow those issues to settle, and then we start working exceptions. So keeping note, and I know I say this at every meeting, applicants who do their due diligence don't have that rap sheet and have everything aligned, we're talking 1 week. If we're working into exception world, we're looking at 70 days. So again, the moral is make sure the initial applications have correct information. So many of you know that we've been we're basically coming up on our 1-year anniversary mark of having transitioned to the new Bris system. And so pretty much staff have adapted to the new procedures that have in place. And during this time, I mean, we basically have about 27 different license types, which equates to close to about 1,000 transactions that we had to program. So we're talking about 1,000 transactions that are associated with all activities with the Bureau and its licensing and other regulatory activities. Since we launched last year, we've implemented 80 enhancements or refinements, primarily to enhance productivity and to address some system issues where the system didn't quite work where it was expected. All told, and I know I've said this before when I've gone out to the associations and presented, and I may have talked about this a little bit in July, but now on the 1-year mark, I really do want to commend the staff that were involved with the Bris transition. I want to commend the Bureau staff because change is hard. And when you completely change your business process in its entirety, those are difficult transitions. And yet we were able to do this, and we were able to, transition during the initial push during the first quarter of 2016, have come down and pretty much kept our licensing processing times around that 60-day mark. Yes, we at a point did ebb a little bit higher, but we immediately addressed it. And I do want to commend Bureau's management and Bureau staff for making that as transparent as possible for our applicants and our licensees. Not saying that things are perfect. We continue to work with our department information office as well as the Bris vendors to identify other refinements, and we do have ones still coming down the pipeline that are in the queue waiting to be implemented. I think one of the most notable ones came out of a suggestion that originated here in the Bureau and the Advisory Committee, which talked about having, when somebody is applying for initial licensure or even renewal, when that license is issued, in the same fashion when the applicant goes into Bris, submits their payment, submits their application, they get an automatic email response acknowledging that it has been received satisfactorily. Committee member in a prior committee meeting asked about the potential, if we have that functionality to be able to communicate directly with the applicant, why can't we let the applicant know also when the license has been issued? And we have worked toward that. It is a refinement that's in the queue, and we hope within the next 6 months that that will actually go into implementation. We've also had, in the industry's approaches about this, again, the Bris platform with BSIS coming on board has really challenged its functionality. Company applicants were not prevalent in the first launch. It is with BSIS in the second launch, having what we want, all the breadth of the functionalities of for company apps. And I know that we've had some concerns raised by the industry that when an individual holds a license as a sole owner, that their company name and they're doing business under a company name, that their individual name does not appear on Bris, that only the company name. Again, that was an enhancement that we've worked with the department and with our vendor, and we hope within the next 6 months, certainly by the end of the year, that enhancement will be in place. In regards to licensing stats for fiscal year 2015-16, we received a total of 195,000 applications, both initial renewal for both employee and companies. Of those, 76,000 involved initial apps and approximately 69,000 involved renewals. The highest employee license population is guards, with about 52,000 applications that we received. The next highest count is the firearm permits, which we issued about 10,000 in last fiscal year. When we look at Bris, we continue to have, similarly to what we did prior to the Bris transition with the online professional licensing system that only guard applicants had access to at that time, we have come back up now with our Bris guard applicant participation in Bris at the comparable rate as what it was in the online professional licensing system. We did see immediately after, probably the first 6 months after transition, we did see participation drop, but I'm happy to say that we have now come up to the participation rates that we had with the online licensing system. We have seen an increase in the use of Bris with the other license types. it's still not anywhere near that 80%. And during the last advisory committee meeting, we talked about different methods for the Bureau to outreach about it. And we have been doing through Facebook, through working with the associations when we go out and do presentations to really emphasize Bris. We are seeing the increase going on, and we hope to continue to see that to grow, because there are tremendous, as I said earlier, there are tremendous benefits for Bris, even for company applicants. And we hope that individuals start partaking of that system. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the business process changes that happened in the last half of 2016. Most notably, that we completely revised the firearm permit application. Historically, the firearm permit application consisted of one document, which was used for both initial and renewal. And going back to my comments earlier where I talked about deficiencies can increase processing times, we really took a look at what was going on with firearm permits and noticed that there are things that the Bureau could do to make it more user-friendly for the applicant, whether at initial or renewal to do it. So what we did was we separated the application form into two separate forms, one for solely for initial and one for renewal. Both of these new firearm permit applications have been on the Bureau's website since the summer. They officially went into effect on September 1st, 2016. And what I mean by officially going into effect is from July, when we sent the letters out to all the firearm training facilities, we did our email blast, we did our due diligence in updating the application to let people know about the changes. We allowed for transition time to occur because firearm, particularly on the renewals, occur quarterly. And so we allowed for transition to learn about the new form. Effective September 1, any firearm requalification that was completed after September 1, 2016 has to be on the new form. We will continue to accept for the next, as we continue to cycle out for the 2-year period of any renewals that may have been just starting around the transition period, to allow a firearm requalification completed prior to September 1st to be on the old form. But anything completed after that date has to be on the new form. The other notable change that was made on the firearm permit application that we noted was there was a little bit of confusion that individuals in the requalification process believed that if they started their first requalification with one firearm training facility, that all remaining 3 requalifications needed to be completed at that facility. And that is not the case. And so the new renewal form actually has it's consisting of 4 different documents, one related to each requalification. So for firearm facilities and anybody that's completing a firearm permit training requalification, you should be able to walk out with that document on that date. So it's not being held. And part of that was we had situations where maybe a facility closed down or instructor was no longer training, and when the applicant was coming back for their 3rd requalification, they could not get the documentation needed to substantiate that they had actually, in fact, completed all the required requalifications. So the new form makes it more clear to the applicant and more clear to the firearm training and facility instructors that one form on the requal for each requal. The other thing that we discovered during the latter part of 2016 was the Bureau's process for adding a caliber was not in alignment with the law. There had been a current practice that at any time anybody was going through a requalification, they would just basically fire as if it was a requal on the new caliber. We've discontinued the issuance of a new caliber from June 1st to July 19th. And we took a close review of the current legal pathways that we could do this. And we established at this point in time that the only pathway to add a caliber under current law and regulation is that the permit holder completes the training that's required for an initial firearm permit. So that means firing twice, one for practice and one for live fire, and completing the use of force, de-escalation use of force training, as well as passing the written firearm exam. Pursuant to the provisions in the Private Security Services Act, Section 7583.2 and 7599.40, we developed a new certificate of proficiency in specified calibers and request for replacement for permit form. Those documents are now out on the website, and this is the process that's to be used to add a caliber. We also we sent out notifications to the firearm facilities instructors about the new process. And so I think the one thing that I want to kind of share at this point in time is if an individual adds a caliber, let's say midstream in the requalification, adding the caliber does not in itself trigger a new requalification schedule. Once they come in with that additional caliber, then any subsequent requalifications may include that new caliber. And for example, if the permit holder adds a caliber between the first and second requalification, then the second, third, and fourth requalifications may be carried out with the existing calibers on the firearm permit as well as the new one that was recently added. So this helps you sync your requalification schedules and doesn't involve duplicate or multiple requalifications. And again, a reminder, at the time that all of this was playing out, we did send letters out to all the training facilities, and we did send out email blasts, and the information of the new procedures were posted on the website, and I believe even our Facebook. So we tried to get the word out. So in regards to closing and the licensing update, can't say enough, try to use Bsis for all your licensing activities that have been programmed to be able to come in through the Bsis platform. If you're going to submit a paper application, and we totally understand that not everybody has access to a computer, the number one takeaway is to write clearly, because if you're not writing legibly, that means Bureau staff do not know what you're saying needs to be inputted. And make sure that all the requested information on the application, answering the conviction questions, providing the information required to in regards to your powers to arrest training, all of that needs to be complete. If you're using Bsis to renew your firearm or even to get your first firearm permit, there's a misconception out there that simply going onto Bsis and making the payment for the firearm permit renews it. We've had multiple occasions where no one is uploading. The requirement is payment and uploading your firearm permit requalification application. If all of those documents are not included, you don't have a renewal that satisfies the requirements of the law. And because the firearm permit does not have a period of time to be able to renew in a delinquent mode, basically the legal authority to renew that firearm permit expires when the firearm permit expires. If you're not renewing appropriately, we don't have a complete application, it could result in you having to completely go back through to get initial application. So the new firearm permit application forms have this additional information to make sure that individuals are aware of these requirements so that they can plan accordingly. I think the takeaway for those of you with the firearm training facilities and the firearm instructors is if you could partner with us in getting that word out, it would be very helpful. Enforcement. So during fiscal year 2015-16, the Bureau's enforcement unit conducted 92 compliance inspections of private patrol operators and firearm and baton training facilities. When I say both training facilities, they were done, but the primary focus was on the firearm facilities. In July of last year, we expanded, so at the beginning of this current fiscal year, we expanded the inspections to include alarm companies, repossession agencies, and locksmith companies. And from July to present, we have completed 55 inspections. So inspections provide the Bureau the opportunity to remind licensees of the laws and regulations governing their activities. However, when a serious violation is noted, which has significant consumer protection or public safety component, the Bureau staff may issue a citation, and we do have this when we have the citation fine authority that was established in the acts by the legislature. So the purpose of the compliance is one, education, but if something comes up during that review, it could end up resulting in a cite and fine in order to help promote compliance. In fiscal year 2015-16, the Bureau opened nearly 5,800 investigations and closed about 5,400 investigations. However, keep in mind that this information includes the application investigations that are open when we receive a rap sheet. So when we look at those investigations that were drilled down specifically to responding to a complaint, we're talking about a little over 1,000 in the last fiscal year. And that 1,000 count of investigations includes those investigations that were carried out both by Bureau enforcement staff as well as the Division of Investigation, which is the Department of Consumer Affairs Law Enforcement Branch. In fiscal year 2015-16, the Bureau opened 91 cases with the Attorney General's office to take formal disciplinary action on a license. We denied over 1,300 applications for licensure due to criminal conviction activity, and we automatically suspended 640 licenses. Those primarily are involving the security guard registrations. And keep in mind, the automatic suspensions only applies to those license types where the Bureau has the statutory authority to take that automatic suspension action. Otherwise, when we have these incidents, they're going through accusation through the Attorney General's office. In total, out of the actions with the AG's office, outcome resulted in 102 licenses being revoked last fiscal year. As well as the issuance of 47 citations, 40% of which related to unlicensed activity administrative citations. And during the July 7th, 2016 meeting, we discussed unlicensed locksmith activity. The Division of Investigation provided a general presentation regarding how they, DFI investigators, assist the Bureau with these type of investigations. However, at that time, we could not share specifics because some of the investigations are still in progress. I now want to share the outcome of an investigation involving an unlicensed locksmith activity. So in April, the Division of Investigation conducted several sting operations in response to the Bureau's request for service. And as a result, we did find some violations relating to bait and switch tactics for the locksmith, where they quoted one price for coming out to take care of the locksmith service and ended up substantially more costs. The Division of Investigation in the Bureau worked with local district attorney's office, and one of them has actually resulted as well in misdemeanor citations involving unlicensed work that was issued to a case filed down in Southern California. Another individual was cited for unlicensed activity for using the number of a locksmith company that was related to a relative. This allegedly gave the individual the company license number to use when providing locksmith services. Again, this was all brought out by the sting, which back in April we could not discuss because of the confidentiality. But the reason I wanted to bring it forth right now is I had a feeling that maybe the presentation in of itself didn't fully demonstrate not only in the locksmith arena, but as well in the alarm and all the other industries when you kind of express your concerns about license activity. That there's oftentimes the Bureau is working in these arenas, but due to protecting the integrity of the confidentiality of the investigation, we're not able to discuss it at that time. In addition, I'd like to talk about a couple of recent disciplinary cases. And after an accusation, the Bureau filed, after an investigation, the Bureau filed an accusation against a principal and qualified manager of a PPO licensee for several violations of the Act, including unjustified use of force, using badge patches on uniforms that were not approved, using insignia on their vehicle that resembled local law enforcement, and knowingly allowing an employee to carry a firearm permit without a valid firearm permit. So that's something that moved forward. The Bureau also filed an accusation against a private investigator and licensee who was convicted for various acts of unauthorized communications with a prisoner. Specifically, this licensee smuggled cell phones and narcotics to the prisoner during an alleged professional visit. So again, I know in the past that my updates have focused on licensing, which may have, I've had a lot of inquiries, but what are you doing in enforcement? And so this kind of little short presentation gives you a highlight of some of the things that we are working on. In regarding to legislation from last year, the bills that affecting the Bureau, I'm going to talk about the 4 bills that were enacted into law that do affect the Bureau as well as the private security industry. And so the first one is Senate Bill 1196, which was by Senator Hill. And I know that many of you have not heard this bill number before when I identified it as the Bureau Sunset Bill, because the Bureau Sunset Bill for the entire of calendar year 2015 and pretty much over half of 2016 was associated with Senate Bill 468. However, in August of last year, the author chose to basically it's called a gut and amend, so they amended the provisions out of 468 into 1196 for the purpose of using 468 for another vehicle. 1196 was signed into law, and some of the notable things that this bill brings forth for the Bureau is effective January 1, 2018, registered security guards applying for initial firearm permit must be found capable of exercising, and this is straight from the bill, appropriate judgment, restraint, and self-control for the purposes of carrying a firearm during the course of his or her guard duties. The determination of that capability of being able to show that self-restraint and control will be carried out via an assessment that's going to be administered by a third-party vendor selected by the Bureau. The cost of the assessment will be borne by the applicant or the applicant's designee, which can include the applicant's employer. I'm going to be talking more about this provision of SB 796 in item 6. So for now, I'm just kind of leave it with this highlight at this point in time. The other things that Senate Bill SB 1196 did was the recurrent exemptions in various acts, notably the Private Security Services Act, that exempted California law enforcement peace officers from specified training requirements, as both related to the firearm and to the powers to arrest. SB 1196 extended this exemption to specified federal qualified law enforcement officers. Additionally, current law requires any private patrol operator, licensee, or applicant to maintain or provide the Bureau with proof of having a $1 million general liability insurance policy or maintaining that upon renewal or any time upon request by the Bureau. SB 1196 added the specific requirement that that certificate needs to include BSIS as a certificate holder. And the purpose for that change was so that the Bureau is made aware of if an insurance policy is being canceled or if there are changes on the provisions of the policy being made. Additionally, SB 1196 requires the Bureau to inspect every newly licensed firearm training facility within 120 days of licensure. It also requires us to maintain a mandatory targeted inspection program of all firearm training facilities. As I kind of started with my presentation earlier in enforcement, we are already doing inspections. This is now taking what we're doing and putting it in statute of having a schedule. The follow-up are based on random or targeted inspections, and those are going to be focused on whether we have, if we go out and do a compliance inspection and we notice several violations, that one may be more likely to be maybe revisited again in a year's time, as opposed to if there's everything seems to be operating well. We anticipate, just based on the population size of the firearm training facilities, that these compliance inspections will be happening about once every 3, potentially 4 years, unless something is noted and we need to come in sooner. Additionally, the bill clarified that a PPO licensee must report to the Bureau any violent incident involving a guard employee within 7 days of that incident occurring. Most notably, if that security guard employee discharged the firearm for any reason. It's not even just that was discharged and there was another individual involved. Anytime there's been a discharge of the firearm, the Bureau needs to be notified. And the Practice Act before made that notification requirement very clear for the security guard. It wasn't quite as clear for the requirement on the private patrol operator. But this bill now makes it very clear that that requirement exists for both the security guard involved in the incident as well as the employing private patrol operator. Another thing that SB 1196 did was it requires all alarm agreements with an automatic renewal provision that includes a term of more than 1 month to include a distinct disclosure separate from the terms and conditions of the policy, advising the consumer that that agreement has an automatic renewal provision. We refer to them as evergreen clauses. And basically what happens is many consumers are entering into primarily monitoring agreements where they're not aware that in the policy, down in the terms and conditions, there is a provision that in order to be able to cancel that, or if you don't provide cancellation notice within a prescribed time and in a prescribed manner, that the policy will automatically renew. And we have had cases that we've looked at where that renewal period can be up to 5 years, where somebody's locked in contractually. So SB 1196 is addressing that issue by ensuring that the consumer is made aware that the agreement that they're entering into contains that automatic renewal provision, as well as the consumer needs to either initial or sign on at the disclosure as verification that he or she is made aware of that. If that signature by the consumer is not there, it basically nullifies the automatic renewal provision. The bill also touched upon the alarm company operators and PI applicants relating to who hold their license as a limited liability company, and similarly with what I discussed on the certificate of liability insurance requiring to have the Bureau listed as certificate holder. That requirement was also extended to those insurance policies for those type of licenses. Lastly, the bill clarified the Bureau's authority to auto-suspend an alarm company license organized as an LLC for failing to provide the Bureau with proof of maintaining the required general liability insurance. It basically included the specific language that's in the Private Investigator Act as well as the Private Security Services Act, providing a very clear pathway on how the auto-suspension should occur. Okay, I guess I still have more. So this is our sunset bill, and it was quite a thick bill. So this bill also clarified that a private investigator licensee or qualified manager of private investigator license who possesses both a firearm, BSIS firearm permit and a California concealed weapon permit may carry a concealed firearm if they meet certain specified conditions as specified in the bill. It also cleaned up 2 sections of the Private Investigator Act to clarify that the qualified manager of a PI applicant for licensure must sign the application form, and the PI licensee organized as a LLC must notify the Bureau of any changes in its managing members and or offices within 30 days. This was basically a technical change cleanup to legislation that had been enacted the prior year authorizing private investigator licenses to be organized as an LLC. The bill also revised various fine amounts and civil penalty amounts throughout all the practice acts regulated by the Bureau. And it mandates the Bureau to investigate specified allegations involving firearm permit holders and authorizes the Bureau to request an emergency order against the permit holder through the administrative hearing process if upon completion of the investigation the Bureau determines the permit holder presents an undue hazard to public safety that may result in substantial injury to another. The bill also clarified that an officer of a Bureau licensed corporation or an officer or member of a Bureau licensed private investigator LLC or alarm company or operator LLC, and that's also private patrol operator for the licensed corporation, cannot hold a Bureau firearm permit based solely on being an agent of these legal entities. So by being an officer on the license does not say that you hold the qualifying license. In order for these individuals to obtain a firearm permit, they must hold a separate Bureau license or registration that is statutorily authorized to be associated with the firearm permit. We're moving on to the next bill. So Assembly Bill 1859 by Assemblymember Gallagher added repossession order to the Act and defined it to mean the same as assignment, since both terms are used in the industry. It also deleted the definition of repossession from the Act and removed debt collection from the list of qualifying experience for eligibility to obtain a certification as qualified manager. Assembly Bill 2632 by Assemblywoman Kristen Olson permits investigative journalism experience to qualify for eligible experience for the purpose of obtaining a private investigator license. So those 3 bills, I said 4 originally. I did say 4, but originally 4 I spoke about earlier, but one of them did not make it. So at this point, those were the 3 bills that moved forward that were signed into law. In regard to the Bureau's activities on regulations, the Bureau proposed regulations to update firearm training and qualification requirements They were approved by the Office of Administrative Law, filed with the Secretary of State in September, and they officially went into effect on January 1, 2017. The new regulations provide clarification on the range requalification requirements, including those relating to the use of a firearm simulator. We'll talk a little bit more specifically of what the firearm simulator regulations, or the firearm simulator provisions in the regulations detail in item 9. Having said that, the new regulations provide a sound work for the Bureau to begin updating the BSIS Firearm Training Manual, which I know was one of the previous issues brought before the committee as something to consider to work on. So we're setting the foundation for moving forward. Moving on to Bureau staffing, I want to share that the Bureau appointed a new licensing manager, I think about 6 weeks ago, Jennifer Munoz. Jennifer has worked for the Bureau for many years, including several in the Bureau's Policy and Admin Unit. And Jennifer will be here this afternoon to present on one of the items of the agenda, but we do want to congratulate her on starting this new position. The Bureau also completed the hiring of 2 program techs in the licensing unit and 2 new enforcement analysts in the enforcement units, which were the result of the Bureau's approval of a budget change proposal for fiscal year 2016-17. No. Yeah. So additionally, we permanently established a second deputy chief position for the Bureau. In the past, we've had 2 deputies, but that position had not been formally an authorized position. And through the budget change proposal process, we now incorporated that position officially to the Bureau. In addition, we've hired 3 student assistants and currently have about 4 permanent intermittent staff primarily working in the licensing unit. And as a result of that, our processing times are in a very, very good place because of this additional staff that we have in place, both through augmentation of our permanent positions as well as bringing on these permanent intermittents. Lastly, after 30 years of state service, 14 of which were serving as the Bureau's enforcement manager, George Paddock retired at the end of 2016. The Bureau is currently in the process of hiring a new enforcement manager. We hope to have that process completed by the end of this month, the beginning of February. In closing the Bureau update, I just want to remind people again, and the interested parties list reminder. In order to help you stay up to date on what's happening to the Bureau, we cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you to go onto the Bureau's website and sign up to get automatic email notifications when we are making those changes. Right now, I think our population is, about 4,000 on the list? So we have about 4,000 on the list, and as I talked about earlier, we're talking several 100,000 licensees. So can't share enough getting the word out. It's a really good way. We use it to notify of changes in the law. We use it to notify if a business process is revised, such as adding the caliber. We use it to just notify of changes that are going on in the Bureau. So it's a really good way to stay informed. And again, it's on the BSIS website under the quick hits list. And all you have to do is click on that, go to there, you click, put your email address, and you've joined. So that concludes my Bureau update. At this point in time, do I have any questions or comments from the committee?
Yes, Chief, I had a question. Is Jennifer Munoz going to be addressing item 11? That would be after lunch.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
Chief, I had a question regarding licensing. Congratulations again. Thank you to you and your staff for all your hard work. In the industry, we've noticed the quicker turnaround, especially for people using the Bris system. I did have a question regarding tying in the live scan background results to a Bris guard card application, for example. The old system allowed or required the ATI number, which is the tracking number from the live scan transmission, to be entered into the old licensing system. On the new Bris licensing system, you don't enter in any kind of ATI, again, the tracking number for the live scan. Would that help in tying in the live scan background results to the Bris guard card application?
Larissa, can you step forward and talk a little about the functionality of Bris and the matching process? So coming forward is Deputy Chief Clarissa Serrata Chavez. She's overseeing the licensing activities right now in the Bureau. She was also the BSIS Breeze special point of contact on the entire Breeze project.
And then I also may call on Andrea, since she's more of our expert with the fingerprints and the matching and so on. Basically,
Is your mic on?
because everything is done through an interface, so when the live scan is being matched to the company or the employee application or the individual, it's basically looking for the first name, last name, social security, and DOB. If there's any kind of deviation or typo in that area, it doesn't match up. And that's just it. If it all has to match up, those items have to match up. It's not looking at the middle name. We clarified that in the past. So as long as first name, last name, DOB, and SSN are matching what was submitted on the application to, and that's why we sometimes educate people and ask them that when they're working with their live scan operator and they're actually getting live scan, that they kind of maybe look over and make sure that they've typed in everything correctly to match the application, because that's where we normally see it. There's a typo, a number's been reversed. We will get the actual responses, but again, it didn't match where it could have matched through the interface without manual contact. Now we're having, when we're working our exception report, we're having to go and look for those prints, because we're going to assume this person should have live scanned. We'll go look through our matching report, find the prints, and then we actually will match it at that time. And then once that's done, if everything's clear and there's no wrap and so on, and there's no delay, then really it would be more of an overnight process for it to issue through
So
the system.
in the prior system, how did the ATI play into that transaction? And
I think it was more for reference, the way, and the online system was built prior to me being there. I don't know if you were even there when they first built the online system.
so
Yeah.
to your
It was,
knowledge,
it was just fields that were there. The only reason we would probably use that information is if we needed to go refer back and search further. But really, what I think you're asking is, how do we get the items to match and just keep moving forward without having manual intervention?
No, my point was, would adding a required field on Breeze to indicate the ATI number help in tying in this information? Because what I see is when people get to that 60-day period, they'll call in, they'll get a hold of someone, and then the tie-in process happens. Whereas it may be a little easier for the Bureau to automate that tie-in process if you already know their ATI number.
Well, because we're having to pull it through the report, I mean, I could see plus and minuses, but because we're pulling the report through the interface, we already have all that information on the report. The only reason I could see is we have no response, we have no record of it, and then maybe in that instance, but other than that, all that information is already provided to us. And I don't know, Andrea, maybe you can speak on how the old system worked, because I'm not really clear on how ATS worked as far as the fingerprints and the ATI number.
and I guess the question that I would ask is, was the ATI relevant in any of the prior matching? Do we know?
It's helpful. We used it before. It was
I'm
it was
sorry,
a field.
in the automatic matching.
In the automatic matching, no, it wouldn't be helpful. But if since Breeze doesn't request an ATI number because it's not required for everyone to complete live scan, we have applicants that are outside of the state that are going to submit fingerprint cards. Therefore, they wouldn't have an ATI number to provide in that field. What you can do, which would be helpful, is if you can scan a copy of the completed live scan form and attach it to your online transaction when they're actually applying for the security guard. That way we would have the information. So if we were working that application prior to the applicant calling, we'd be able to see the attachments, locate the ATI number that way, and do a manual search for the fingerprints if they hadn't matched on their own.
And so I guess what I'm hearing would be the question, would there be a benefit and I get because we can't make it mandatory because people may not be using LiveScan, but providing an optional field for the ATI number that if completed, would it facilitate any of matching process or anything along that line?
See if there was if the system had capability to add an additional field for ATI.
Okay, so not necessarily anything for the automatic matching, but if it doesn't match and there's needing to be research and working with the applicant, that ATI would be there. And so I think what I'm hearing is there may be some system limitations in fields, but it's certainly what I'm hearing.
Right.
It's worth looking into. So.
And we've always appreciate any kind of suggestions. Not everything is possible, but even when we travel and we go to conferences and so on, you know, we sometimes get feedback, whether by email or in person, and I like to take that information down because then I'm like, hey, you know, that's a good idea. Let me see if it's possible. And it's not something that I can do overnight, but it's something that we would definitely say, if this would benefit us or the licensees, we would definitely look into, you know, enhancing our system with that capability.
And also, if there is that need, because so maybe updating our tips on Breeze. I don't know if we may not be able to add the field anytime soon, but can we add text to where the live scan information or anything to the effect of uploading a copy of your live scan, you know, application is beneficial to will assist the bureau or something like that. I think what I'm hearing is and thank you, because again, the goal for all of us, for the applicant, for the employer, and for the bureau is to get that license issued when obviously the person meets all the specifications for licensure as quickly as possible. And if there's these little things that we can kind of tie up some of those things to make it easier for the bureau to do its research, I think it's worth looking into. So I thank you for bringing it forth, and we'll add it to our items to research to see maybe if we can't do the data field immediately, some other mitigating steps that we might be able to take to still reach that end goal.
Sounds good. And another one, briefly, my company also owns and operates live scan machines, so I understand that side of the process as well. And I understand with licensing, what you're looking at as far as tying in the live scan to the Breeze application is first name, last name, date of birth, and social security number. And that has to match the live scan, what the live scan operator puts in order for things to kind of marry and be automated. The social security number is not a required field on the live scan, and I know the Bureau's put out that, you know, it needs to be on there to tie things in. There's other licenses, for example, teacher credentialing, where the social security number is required. So a suggestion would be to work with the California Department of Justice to get your tables updated to make the social security number required, since it is a social security number or taxpayer ID is required to be an applicant. So why not make that field required, mandatory on the live scan operator screen?
Mm-hmm.
That's not us, that's DOJ.
It's a DOJ table update under your ORI number.
So we can certainly request that, but it's working with another agency. So suggestion duly noted. We will research, and during the next committee, we'll bring you back an update on what we've learned. Any other questions from the committee? Do I have any comment from the public? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to item 6, discussion of the Bureau's implementation efforts for Senate Bill 1196. So I'm going to focus the discussion on the implementation requirement for the Bureau to establish the assessment that I talked about earlier for the applicant for a firearm permit to demonstrate the capability of exercising appropriate judgment, restraint, and self-control for the purposes of carrying a firearm while on duty. So legislation was signed by the governor late September. Immediately after the bill was signed into law, the Bureau started into action to start implementing the necessary steps to get this put into forth for the January 1, 2028 implementation date. And so the bill, now the law, requires the Bureau to execute 2 contracts. The first contract was with a licensed psychologist or another subject matter expert to assist us in developing the scope of work for the third-party vendor contract and to assist the Bureau with reviewing the vendor bids. The second contract is to secure the third-party vendor that's going to be actually administering the assessment. Factors that the Bureau is going to consider in awarding that contract for the third-party vendor, and I'm repeating this came straight out of the statute. Cost to the applicant to complete the assessment. So what is that reasonable cost for an individual to complete? We have to find, we need to find that point. Is it going to be $200? Is it going to be $100? At this point, we don't know. We know, in talking to Senator Hill, what he's hoping that we may be able to do, but this is all going to be finding out through the contract, through the contracting process, what that fee amount is going to be. Another significant consideration in the awarding of the contract is the geographic accessibility of that vendor statewide. So we can't just have offices in, the Bay Area or LA, core LA. We need to be able to ensure any security guard firearm applicant throughout the state has reasonable access to go and to complete the assessment. Third, we need to ensure that that vendor is going to be carrying out the assessment, and the assessment itself complies with specific standards that are associated with these type of assessments. So toward this goal, again, we immediately started with doing the research to get a request for a bidder for the licensed psychologist, subject matter expert. And we have essentially completed the request for offer. I'm sorry, we've essentially completed right now the invitation to bid process. I hope I'm using the right terminology. And at this point, we should be very close to contract award for the subject matter expert by the end of this month, beginning of February. So what that means is once we have this person on board, we're going to immediately start working with this individual to develop the language for the scope of work of what the assessment is going to be entailing. We're not going to define a specific assessment. It's just parameters that need to be met to ensure that this assessment is evaluating the appropriate attributes or characteristics that are associated with the desired result of being able to demonstrate the capability of exercising appropriate judgment and restraint. I have been repeatedly asked if the Bureau is looking for a vendor that will develop the assessment or whether we're going to utilize a vendor that has a current assessment in place. And what has been frequently brought forth to me is the type of assessments that are used by law enforcement, the Minnesota Multi-Facet Personality Test or the IPAT, and I don't remember what the full name is, but the acronym is IPAT. And so at this point, we don't know. I mean, we're so early in the process, that's going to be vetted out and working with this licensed psychologist, subject matter expert that we are going to be executing this contract shortly. I've asked also if a security guard who previously held a firearm permit will need to complete the assessment. So the way the bill is written, anybody that has a current firearm permit is essentially grandfathered in. You will be able to renew your permit without having to do this new assessment. However, if that individual allows that firearm permit to lapse in renewal, and you're no longer eligible for renewal, then it's going to require a new initial firearm permit application. And the way the law is written is, for the purpose of obtaining an initial firearm permit, the applicant will need to complete the new assessment. So even if a security guard held a firearm permit before, if they allow that permit to expire without it being renewed, they will be required to complete the assessment. And as a reminder, I touched upon it a little bit when I was talking about the changes with the firearm permit application. There is no grace period for a firearm permit. It expires. There's no late delinquent renewal. Once it's expired, the eligibility renew is done. Bureau also is going to need to make several configuration changes to our Bsis platform to ensure that the integrity of the legislature's intent for the assessments are satisfied. Those include making changes of new required fields for firearm permit applicant to ensure the assessment requirement is satisfied. This will be not an external new feature in Bris, it will be internal. For Bureau staff, it's going to be a checkpoint to ensure that the firearm permit is not issued until we have it in the system demonstrated that this person has not only taken the assessment, but the Bureau received an assessment result that demonstrated the person is capable of exercising the appropriate judgment and control. It's also providing internal controls to ensure that a person who's found not capable of demonstrating this is not able to obtain a license, a firearm permit through another qualifying license. For example, if the guard fails the assessment and they go to try to get an alarm agent registration and try to associate their firearm permit with the alarm agent registration, the system will be flagged to let us know that this individual has failed the assessment. And accordingly, that person's ineligible. We're also going to be making revisions to the firearm permit document itself to list the specific qualifying licenses that are associated with that permit. So right now, it just says firearm permit. It's now going to say what that firearm permit is associated with. So we're not going to be able to have an individual associate a firearm permit with an alarm agent and then use it as a guard. The Bureau also needs to adopt regulations to enable us to seek an emergency order against a firearm permit if after an investigation is determined that individual poses an undue hazard to public safety. Policy unit in the Bureau, we've already begun undertaking this process. The rulemaking process is quite lengthy. Again, our target is to have everything rolling for the January 1, 2018. Lastly, the Bureau is going to have to adopt regulations, adopt a form by regulation that is going to be used by the vendor to notify the Bureau of the assessment results. We're also going to need to establish a secured electronic account for the transmittal of the assessment results from the third-party vendor to the Bureau. So those are some of the logistical, technical things that we're going to have to take, that we're working on this year to make sure that everything is ready to go January 1, 2018. Have any questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, do I have any comments from the public? Okay, then let's go ahead and move on to item 7. Discussion regarding BSIS baton permits. So the Private Security Services Act authorizes a Bureau-certified baton training facility to issue a Bureau baton permit to a registered security guard or applicants for security guard registration. The purpose of the baton permit is to authorize that security guard permit holder to carry and use a baton while on duty. The PSS Act also requires a Bureau-certified baton instructor to administer the training required for the issuance of the baton permit in accordance with the baton training manual, the BSIS baton training manual. Upon completion of that baton training course, the instructor facility issues the individual a baton permit and provides the Bureau with a roster of all the persons who completed the course. So the way this business model is set up, training facilities have to come to the Bureau to get the baton permit. They have the baton permit and then they issue the baton permit. However, that baton permit is not reflected in the Bureau's licensing system until that course roster is brought forth to the Bureau. And hopefully, again, legibility, no transposition of numbers, everything is accurate for us to be able to input the data. Once the data is inputted into our system, Bris, then that information is reflected that the individual's the individual's security guard registration is linked to a baton permit. Baton permits have no expiration date, and there's no refresher training required to maintain the permit. Once the training facility issues the baton permit, it is valid so long as the qualifying security guard registration is current and valid. That doesn't mean the Bureau does not have the authority to take action on the firearm permit, But barring anything along the lines of an administrative action that needs to be taken, that firearm permit, what'd I say? Sorry. That baton permit stays valid as long as the qualifying security guard registration is valid. Bureau would like to hear from the committee. We'd like to hear your thoughts about these current requirements for the baton permit, and both procedural of the permits being issued to the facility, that two-step process, that tiered process of getting it into the licensing system, as well as overall thoughts on that the permit does not expire.
Chief, I believe I did mention this on the previous meetings regarding looking into the licensees requiring them to get refresher courses when it comes to baton permits, and same thing, in order for them to, if there is an expiration date on the baton permits, those refresher courses are required for them in order for them to renew the baton permits. And I think there's kind of like a confusing thing too. The baton instructors certification, they're required to take their certification from either a federal law enforcement agency to be acceptable for the BSIs to license them as an instructor. And then for security guards, all they have to do is take it from that licensed instructor in order to get that firearm permit. But this is what I've heard from Baton. I'm not a Baton training facility, I'm a firearm training facility, but since I represent the Baton training facilities, there are feedbacks that I'm getting from these facilities that some instructors who are certified under a certain baton system, for example, Peacekeeper baton system is where they got certified, they modify that instructor can actually modify the way it's taught to security officers, because the Peacekeeper baton system is designed for law enforcement, different type of use of force depending on the agency. So got to be some type of clarification. Like, I believe the baton system right now is a general license where a security guard can be certified on a PR-24 baton system but can carry a collapsible if they want to, or it's just recommended that or the license will just specifically say you're only required to carry a PR-24. Can we make a clarification on that? Is that the current licensing right now as far as security officers, the baton permits?
So,
Is that what the current license right now? If a security guard right now has a baton permit, even though they were, let's say they got certified 8 years ago with a PR-24, with the licenses, I believe there was a change in between that they can carry a collapsible now.
no, it's my understanding that collapsibles are not allowed, and I believe that's in the baton training manual.
It is in the manual. The challenge is the baton permit says it's baton permit is valid as long as you have a valid security guard registration. So to an employer or to a peace officer on the street, if the security officer is carrying a collapsible, a side handle, or a straight baton, it doesn't matter because their baton permit says they're authorized to carry a baton permit while they're on duty. The concern, and I share the same concern, is the actual training, especially with no refresher training. So I would definitely support refresher training and training specific to the device they're allowed and authorized to carry, which should be indicated on the baton permit with a checkbox. All the 3 devices could be listed on the permit. The instructor could check or initial the specific devices that he or she successfully trained on, and that's what should be valid. I don't know if we're talking about licensing of the instructor at this point. No, okay, I won't go into the requirements because it's
the permit itself.
Okay, permit itself. I'll stay on that. I'll stay on topic. The permit itself, I'm my company is also a training facility for Baton, so I'm familiar with the process and employer a certified Baton instructor. We have no problems ordering Baton permits. It's simple through the mail. You send in the one-page form signed by the person requesting the permits. You put a check in it, and I track how long it takes. It takes from 3 to 4 weeks. It's not a big deal. Mailing and payment and getting the Baton permits back. What I think can be improved on is what happens after the person is issued a Baton permit. The roster, I believe it's called. We're required to type that up. So as far as things being spelled correctly, hopefully are legible. Hopefully that fixes that. But as you know, applicants, as long as you're an applicant for a guard card, you can complete the training. So I think that may be a challenge there as far as tying in that license. So you're required to put on the roster the guard card number. If they don't have a guard card number, we put, applied on, 1 to 17, for example. So there may be some tie-in challenges there because they're not actually licensed, and it could be, 2 to 8 weeks before they are actually licensed. So they have a Baton permit, they don't have a guard card
Well,
yet.
and that's one of the things of why this discussion point is going on, because you're right. That's that tiered process has vulnerabilities. I guess, this has been decades. This statute has been in place. I'm not sure why on a firearm it doesn't become. The Bureau issues the firearm. Somebody completes the training. That proof of training is brought forth to the Bureau, and then the Bureau obviously validates that, and then the firearm permit is issued. The Baton permit is issued before it's really technically even associated with the qualifying license, as you discussed. And so I just wanted to hear, I don't know if there's people here that understand some of the historical reasons for it landing this way differently from the firearm permit.
Right. And from a liability standpoint or legal standpoint, even for that individual, he or she is not allowed to buy a Baton from a vendor unless he or she has a Baton permit or a peace officer ID or something like that. So now this person can go and carry a Baton
And never get a guard registration.
and not being registered as a security guard. So the last point I had regarding the paperwork process is so after the roster is completed, we fold it up and put in the envelope and mail it to the BSIS. Where everything else we're doing here now is electronic, online, Breeze. So it just seems kind of weird for me, once a month, the day after we have a class to, write the BSIS licensing address on an envelope and put the roster in an envelope and mail it in.
So no, the things that you are discussing are the basis for bringing this forth for discussion. So we need to start looking at working. Is it not working? The vulnerabilities. I'd like to hear. So law enforcement folks, I'm going to show a little bit of ignorance on my part. But Baton training, I always thought all perishable skills, post-required refresher training, all perishable skills, and that would include a baton.
Yes.
What
That's
are
true
the
with
training
Baton as well.
requirements for batons in the law enforcement? Not that I'm equating law enforcement to private security, but just getting a sense of what other standards are out there. Perishable skills.
We go once a year,
Is that
but I don't
Is
know
that-
what the mandated requirement is. But usually any law enforcement agency doesn't do the mandatory. We always err on the side of a lot more training than's needed. But it's important for the training because 27 years ago we had a hickory wood stick, and then from there we went to a more of a metal baton to an expandable baton. And when you're dealing with different batons and the make and the weight over time, where they taught to strike somebody in the past is no longer. Everything changes, and I think it's important that you change with the time and technology for for liability, really, for what they're being used for.
If I can add to that, the 2 police departments I was chief for, one conducted ongoing baton training as a perishable skill, but was not required by post to do so. The other did not. It was just initial training. I agree with the captain that it's a skill that, based upon the device, that needs to be refreshed. At the very least, the refresher could entail a discussion of recent incidents involving the use of force in that particular baton. It makes sense that if you're having to renew your guard card, you're having to renew your firearm permit, that you ought to have to renew your baton permit as well. The training is another issue. Do you need to have an exhaustive training refresher course, perhaps an hour or two with a device? But I'm of the opinion that training is important to this professionalized career field, security guards now, and I would suggest that maybe we need to explore requiring the renewal of a baton permit.
So current training time, thank you both. Current training time for the initial is 8 hours, same as the fire, okay.
Firearm was 14.
Right, there's the in classroom and the range qualification. Sorry, I meant, so the 8 hours is what, how much classroom, how much hands-on? Oh, you do? But that's post, right?
That's the
Okay.
post-training requirement.
But for BSIS,
Our class is a 1-day, 8-hour class. I don't teach the class. I don't specifically recall a certain amount of time where it's classroom and physical. I know we complete the BSIS baton training manual and the physical part of it during the 8-hour class.
so going back to what we've heard from Perez and Captain Inglis, they have refresher training. I think we all kind of getting on that page that this is the direction we need to start considering. What would be, it would not necessarily complete an 8-hour, what do you think would be an appropriate place to land? So for the Bureau to start considering these type of issues as we move forward for that refresher training. 2-hour, 4-hour, another 8-hour, every year, every 2 years?
Four hours every 2 years. If let's say if the license will expire every 2 years, just like a guard card, in order for them to renew it, they got to do at least a 4-hour refresher course prior to expiration of the license in order for them to renew it.
So you're saying as part of the, just not worry about the annual, just if you're doing it once every 2 years.
At least you get a refresher course. Yeah.
Any thoughts?
I like that only if you change the baton you're carrying, then you have to go then with the new baton. There's several batons out there that are all used differently.
So similar to what we have on the requirements for an ad caliber. If you now go in with a different type of firearm, you have to immediately go in and show your proficiency. And what you're saying is, if you've not qualified, but I don't want to use demonstrate proficiency and pass the course for this type of baton, and now you're going with another employer and they use this type of baton, then it's incumbent on them to go back and complete training on that new baton.
Yes.
Chief, on that note, I think it's, if you're trying to relate that to the firearm permit, like let's say for example, I am a guard with a baton permit right now, and I'm carrying a side handle PR-24 baton system, and it requires me to do a 4-hour refresher course in order for me to renew it. I have to do a refresher course for that PR-24 in order for me to still carry it on duty. But if I decide to go with another baton and just take that initial 8-hour course for a collapsible, that means it voids my PR-24 now. Because if I choose not to get a refresher course, so basically what would be ideal is, in order for them to carry the different baton system, whether it's a PR-24 collapsible, they have to do both the initial training and refresher for both in order for them to carry it on their permits.
Okay, but you're saying instead of when they start using the new one, if they're using the new one when they go with the refresher, you're saying they have to do a new initial for, I'm sorry, I'm not following.
So let's say I have a site handle right now and it's due for renewal. I have to do a refresher course for that 4 hours. But the refresher course, but I decided to go with a collapsible baton, which is now it's an initial 8 hour because it's a new baton system. On my new permit, it's not going to allow me now to carry the PR-24s because I did not. So if it's something like
It'd be similar to what we're doing with the firearm
With the firearm
with the
permit,
add
correct,
caliber,
correct.
right?
that
But
would,
the training that would be required then after you, similar to once you add the similar to in the firearm when you add the caliber, then it's just refresher training from that
Right.
point on. It was refresher until you use a new type of weapon. Now, I would like to hear from the committee thoughts about collapsible batons being used by private security.
there's different types of collapsible batons, and it does on skills training does require certain strikes. You have what we the peacekeeper baton, which is a heavier type baton system compared to an asp that if you strike someone with an asp, it might take you about multiple strikes depending on where you hit it. We call the green zones. With a heavier baton system, which is like a peacekeeper, sometimes you just need one and they will go down if you hit them on the right spot. So that's kind of like the tricky part is if they get certified with a baton system and they're certified through, let's say, ASP or NODNOC, and they carry a peacekeeper, for me it poses a liability on the security officer because you're kind of like bringing it's a bigger baton system compared to an ASP. So there's got to be some type of
So training is completed in accordance with the Bureau's regulations. A certificate of completion needs to be issued by the training facility. I'm assuming the specificity of the type of weapon on which the individual carried out their training is noted on that certificate, correct?
It would be ideal, yes, that would be.
Okay, so in theory, from an employer's perspective, in order to be able to ensure that if they're coming on, they're hiring somebody and that individual has had training in that type of weapon, they could ask for the certificates of completion for the baton training. And if that individual is unable to provide that for that type of baton, then regardless of the whole the whole baton permit being at the current process not ongoing, you mentioned the word liability, the employer himself or herself can make the determination, or itself, it's corp, can make the determination that this individual needs to complete baton training in order to satisfy that he is proficient in the type of baton that we employ at our.
Right.
Okay. Do you know how often that happens?
Right now, I mean, most employers I speak to, they don't really have. They basically say, well, as long as you're certified with a collapsible, you can carry anything you want. And I would explain it to them. When my department before it's changed from ASP to a peacekeeper, and this is why we went to this baton systems. It's more effective because of the kinetic. You have to go through the science of it and the certification in order for them to understand. They don't know the difference between the two. And I just keep on telling them, putting yourself into liability if you're giving this guy a weapon that he's not certified with, just because it says collapsible baton, and you give him a peacekeeper and he's not certified with that. Big liability to you when he starts using it.
Thank you. So I'm hearing that we need to start looking at this in regards to just ongoing refresher training and putting a renewal period, refresher training for renewal, but I'm also hearing another component which I wasn't truly aware of, because I thought that the BSIS Baton permit, based on what the training manual states, that they're only being trained on the Baton permits as specified in the manual of what they can use. And what I think I'm hearing is that that may not be the case of what's going on out there. And so maybe the Bureau needs to start looking at clarifying what type of baton can be used based on completing the BSIS baton training, as well as starting to look at regulatory oversight and potential changes that are needed to address if these needs exist for these other, I mean, if the determination is made that these other type of batons should be permitted to be carried by private security, then where are we going to start looking for regulatory oversight in ensuring proficiency and appropriateness and understanding in the other types? Is that accurate or inaccurate?
Yeah, it's kind of like similar to what is approved by, the Bureau as far as approved calibers. And I would probably suggest or highly recommend if you guys have people working on this, on the baton system and the different baton systems, actually go out in the field, maybe contact an agency and see the different types of baton system. That way they can actually see, okay, this one has more kinetic energy when you strike someone versus this baton system, but they're both collapsible. As part of maybe, at least they have something that, they've actually seen the effects of these weapons.
Chief, I have another point, and it's kind of a bigger picture thing. I was a licensed baton training instructor, never taught a class, became licensed so that we can obtain the training facility baton permit, and then went and hired someone to actually teach the classes. I can tell you that I was certified to teach the expandable baton, and then applied to the Bureau and obtained the training facility baton for the company. But now I could have went and taught and certified and issued a baton permit to security officers for straight baton, PR-24, or the expandable, where my personal training as an instructor was only for the expandable. So kind of a bigger picture thing to look at as far as, instructors, what they're certified to teach, because when they're teaching classes for security officers and issuing baton permits, now that baton permit's good for straight, side handle, or expandable. In our classes now, we cover all three. It's not enough time, as you would realize or understand, to be proficient in any one of those, but to kind of cover our bases, since now they have that permit and can carry whatever they buy, we cover all three during our 8-hour class.
I guess then the question that I would have, thank you, both of you, I'm learning a lot right now. Question I would have is, should private security officers be permitted to use the range of types of batons that are out there?
The penal code specifically provides the authorization for either a wooden club or a baton without specification under the penal code, which is prohibited generally to the general public unless you're a peace officer or otherwise authorized by the Department of Consumer Affairs with this license provision, or are an animal control officer. So the definitions for wooden club and baton are found in the penal code section. So if we're going to get into the specificity of it, you're going to have to tread very carefully because of the way these laws are all linked together.
Would that also apply if we're just looking at collapsible, non-collapsible, or these heavy, sounds like there's big kahuna ones, so.
So with regard to a prohibition on a specific type, if you simply had legislation that specified, or if it was determined, and I don't know at this point, whether or not you could adopt a regulation to specifically. The training program is where the control right now sits legislatively with the Bureau. So it depends on how we go forward from here, whether or not we can accomplish it by regulation or not. But if you wanted to do it cleanly and quickly, it would be through statute change that simply provides that a collapsible baton is or is not permitted, or what the requirements are for training if you use a collapsible baton as opposed to the stationary wooden club.
Right. And for me, and that's what it boils down to, it's the training. If they're trained and certified in that specific expandable straight PR24, personally I'm okay with it. If you think about firearms, the Bureau has said you can take the firearms permit, and if you successfully complete the training and licensing and background, you'll be issued a firearms permit for whatever caliber. How do you know what caliber? Can I do a 22? And Bureau said, as long as it's on the DOJ safe firearm list, we're going to approve it. So how are we going to limit and take away the expandable batons when on the firearm side I can qualify with a 22, 357, 38, 40, 45, it doesn't matter as long as it's on that safe DOJ California safe firearm list.
Well, again, I appreciate the insight, and again, not having been in the law enforcement arena or even in the private security out there in the trenches, I know that we restrict firearms in the extent of not a caliber, but we do restrict, you can't go out there with automatic weapons along that line. So we do know that from a regulatory perspective, there have been parameters set on what private security can use or not use when they're out there on duty. And I understand that that the arguments that you're putting forth could also move forth of a caliber being different caliber being synonymous of the different type of batons that are out there. And so this is part of this open discussion of just becoming educated and informed, not saying one or the other, but just kind of getting input. And I guess I would also, in posing that question, ask is, are there any? Because at the end of the day, the Bureau's been entrusted, and as well as the agencies and entities within the Department of Consumer Affairs, we're entrusted with public safety, consumer protection. And we carry that out in our regulatory duties to make sure that individuals that are holding Bureau licenses have satisfied the requirements specified in statute, not only experience, but if there's specific education or training backgrounds, that they do so. So, again, private security industry does not operate in a bubble. We know very well that these practice acts are decades old. I would venture to say that even though this says it was added in 1994, that was probably the year when the Private Investigator Act and the Private Security Services Act were split. And so we probably could go back even more decades if this has been on the books. So when it was on the books, there was probably just the wood baton, and nobody had any reason to think about these other type of contact weapons. That's the word, right? But we're here now, and this is all part of this open discussion of, again, we want to make sure that the private security industry has the tools that are needed in order to effectively and efficiently carry out their duties. But also, as a Bureau, we're entrusted with the responsibility of making sure that as we start looking at potential changes that are evolving in the industry, because the technology is evolving, the equipment has changed or whatever, that we're moving forth in a way keeping in mind our core mission of protecting the public and consumers. So I understand the question of should batons be restricted? Not sure yet whether where that is landing, but as part of the balance of this discussion, I hear you and appreciate the input on the caliber, and I guess what I would want to hear too is from other members of the committee, notably law enforcement, who may be out there as first responders encountering situations where somebody has been injured, because the guard had been trained on a wood baton, and all of a sudden now they're out there using a collapsible. What do you see, if any? You may not have any, but any concerns in allowing private security industry to use the various types of contact weapons that are out there?
I think as long as they're approved and whoever's giving the training and receiving the training is receiving it for that particular baton, because I agree with you 100%. The reason why the writing says batons is because when that was written, there was just a wood baton and there was no reason to do it. And now we're moving on with technology but we just need to catch up with the requirements for training and for issuing them. But as law enforcement, whether they're carrying, I mean, they're all impact weapons. They all can be used as a deadly weapon. It's where you strike the individual is what you look at. I don't think that the different batons. I wouldn't have a concern if they were using the PR-24 or the straight or the collapsible, just as long as they are aware of what they're using and trained properly to use it.
If I can add to that discussion, there are so many different batons that are out on the market. It seems like I open a magazine every year or so, and there's a new company and a new brand, a spring-loaded baton, to the gravity baton, to the PR-24, a shorter PR. There's so many variations. It's almost like you're regulating weapons. You can't regulate a brand. It is a type of baton, but it changes, evolving so quickly because technology is evolving. I'm with the captain. I think it's more about training, and as long as there's solid, verifiable training that's ongoing, then regardless of the weapon that's out, so long as it's allowed by the California Penal Code, then it ought to be an option of the security guard employer. I know, having worked in that field for a few years, security field, that we had hospitals that wanted a baton but didn't want the long baton, the PR-24. So our officers had to go to a smaller collapsible baton. Just as capable, just as deadly if necessary, but less imposing, if you will. So I don't know that I'm a big proponent of limiting the types of batons that are available to security officers, because they are a necessary tool in the escalation of force. Better they use that than the weapon, if at all possible. And as technology evolves so fast, I would presume that no sooner would your staff get through writing this regulation when a new baton would come out. I suggest, again, in closing my thoughts, is it's all about training. The initial training that's verifiable, and then the ongoing refresher training that will ensure that we behave professionally.
So instead of a strict requirement regarding one or more types of batons being prohibited or permitted, one of the things that we could do, and I believe likely is well within the Bureau's authority right now, I need to do a little bit more research, but I think it's probably within the Bureau's authority right now, is to set a performance standard for an employer that the employer is not allowed to permit an employee to carry any particular type of weapon unless the employer has record to show that the employee has been trained for that specific weapon. So it would then fall on the employer, and except in those rare cases where the employer and the employee are one and the same, the sole proprietor, the private investigator type situation where it's one-to-one rather than a corporation or a business that has employees, you would put the onus back on the employer simply to tell them that you have to make sure that these people have been trained in this particular baton. They're allowed to use any baton that's lawful under California law, but as the employer, it's your responsibility to make sure that they get specified training. That would allow each employer to determine what works best for their clients and their employees.
And Sheila, along that line, the way and as you know, the Private Security Services Act is very much already there in the sense of ultimately it's the employer responsible for ensuring the guard is completing the continuing education training required for maintaining their registration, ensuring that when they hire the guard, that guard has completed the powers to rest and completed all the total 40 hours. So putting that back on the employer is aligning with the way the legislature was already building what this business model was to exist, the relationship that was going to exist between the private security employer and the private security employee.
Correct. But additionally, in this situation, it's similar to the firearm where we have the caliber limitation, but it allows for maximum flexibility within the prohibition. So the Baton training manual would be set up to cover all of the necessary general and specific requirements for obtaining the permit, and then each employer would be required to certify that employee for the particular baton that they are either required to carry or provided to carry. Does that make sense? That would give the industry the most flexibility,
Right.
with also providing the most control.
The challenge I see with that is the employer, most are not certified baton training instructors. So now we're saying the employer could go and say, okay, I've, told you and allowed you to watch a 2-hour video on the use of PR24. Now you can.
I think it goes back to what we talked about, having that employee provide the certificate of completion to demonstrate that they completed the 8-hour training by the Bureau or by a Bureau certified instructor, and providing them, and if not, then sending that individual out to where that training can be completed.
So the 8 hours is our current requirement in order to acquire the right to carry any baton. What I was suggesting was more along the lines of, for example, a private law firm every attorney is required to complete minimum continuing legal education. The employer is also required to make certain that anyone practicing in a particular area is qualified. Now, again, except in those cases where you have a sole proprietorship or a one-to-one partnership, there are training programs, and the lack of following through with that increases the employer's liability. In this case, it would be the potential for a citation or formal discipline in addition to any additional liability. The issue that you have with regard to, the 2-hour training video, I think that right now that there's not enough information that the Bureau has in order to determine all of the various training options that do exist. For example, do any of the manufacturers certify particular types of training? You've named a bunch of different baton solutions. I don't think the Bureau is overly versed in any particular one of them, but for some products, Taser is a good example. They have qualified training programs for their device. It limits the manufacturer's liability as well. So are any of the batons that you are all talking about, do they have manufacturer certified trainings? And that could be something that if the Bureau had that information, could determine whether or not the language would be that for the particular manufactured type of brand of baton, that the records of training that the employer must maintain meet the requirements of the manufacturer. So there are a lot of variables, and right now this is an information gathering, and we don't have enough information to even begin drafting regulations.
And that's kind of where I was going to segue to as well. At this point, we know we have an end goal of what I'm hearing. Why shouldn't we don't have an end goal? We have a proposed end goal, which is refresher training, ensuring renewal of the baton permit is what I'm hearing from the committee. I mean, the consensus has been that. Don't have it be just ongoing. We're going to have a renewal cycle is what I'm hearing the committee is pretty supportive of. Supportive of refresher training. Supportive of that if that private security employee is trained on this type of baton, that before they go and are permitted to use another baton, they need to ensure that they're trained. I think at this point now, the Bureau needs to take all this information back to find out how this is going to meld within current statutory framework, current regulation, see continued discussions, and maybe it may involve a work group of individual SMEs to kind of see where do we need to land. And then, also the reasonableness. We can put requirements in place, but we want to make sure that we're not doing undue burdens to those that are impacted. Again, the overarching goal of the Bureau is to ensure consumer protection, public safety. I think I hear consensus on that. Training, renewal, all that there. How we get there is going to be the ongoing discussions. And so unless I have any further comments from the committee, I feel like this is a really good foundation. You've given us some really good stuff to chew on and things to take back and start looking at what potentially our next steps are going to be here. These next steps are not going to happen overnight. Anything that involves changing the law, changes regs is a process. but at least it can start getting us looking. It also starting to look at going back and looking at the Baton manual. I mean, I took a couple notes of what you've made comments to. Go back and see your concerns within the manual. Can we make tweaks in the manual at this point in time to maybe address this? It may not be one big step of getting from point A to our end goal, but these incremental steps to start getting where we need to go. So I thank all of you for your insight. And at this point in time, then, if I have no further comment from the committee, I'm asking if there's any comments from the public. So if you would be kind enough, if you would state your name, and if it's a tough one to spell, give the spelling so that we can note it for the record.
My name is Brian Baer. The first part's tough to spell. It's Bryon. It's an odd spelling. But I'm a QM for SmartGuard, and I've been 40 years in the industry, and I'm a large proponent of the professionalization of the industry. Before I make my comment, I want to thank Laura for the fine work she's done, and your committee and your staff as a whole. When Bris first came out, boy, everybody was so scared. But you guys have really put it in place, and that's a magnificent thing for the industry. When it comes to non-lethal weapons, where it seems like we're piecemealing here a little bit. We're talking about batons, and there is always going to be some new baton. Something new is going to come out. If we set a standard for non-lethal weapons, and we set a standard for the use of the escalation of force, we say that a security officer, if he's going to carry a firearm, must also be qualified in OC spray. He must also be qualified with a baton and maybe even a taser. Prior to getting his firearms or being able to carry that, they must carry all four so that they have that proper escalation of force at their ready. They must demonstrate competency in that. So in the regs for baton, you say where the peacemaker has a different strike points than say an ASPA might have. Then they must have that demonstration of competency in that. And their certificate, if it specifies that they have that type of training, then that's the one they get to carry. It kind of simplifies the process a little, rather than all of us here having to analyze every new type of weapon that comes out. You guys in law enforcement, you're like, okay, so now you worry about a .357 Magnum as opposed to a 40 cal. Okay, and now it's a 45 cal. We run into those things, but if we set a process for the Bureau and a process for the licensing and the process for the enforcement of it, I think we're in a much better position 5-6 years down the road than we currently are. Anything new they bring up, Laura, if you've already got a specified way to bring it on board and that they have to do it, let them bring all the new batons they want, as long as someone else specifies.
So, Brian, there was something that you said that I want to make sure I understood it correctly, because it's a very interesting concept that you brought forth. I think I'm hearing that there's a benefit, rather than just saying we're going to have a firearm training or we're going to have baton training, more to like a breath use, de-escalation, use of force all the way up, so that when that person's going in, we're just not going to the final step that they're going to be taking, but let's start looking at the OC spray. Let's start looking at this so that that training is a breath of everything in its totality, so that the trainee is seeing the relationship that exists within, and how, because when we're going to firearm training, we're just focusing on firearm training. We're not, yes, there is that 2-hour use, de-escalation of use of force, but it's not really looked in a totality. It doesn't, to me, it's a really interesting concept. It doesn't necessarily lock into what's out there in the real world, because in the real world, you're not this siloed training. You're looking at your whole package of who you are, the training, the situation, assessing, and then reacting.
I think we need that, and I think we need to have that demonstration of competency and that requalification in every weapon that we give them at their disposal. It's as simple for all of us as we walk into our kitchen. Everybody that walks into their kitchen and they're about to cut some meat or cut something else reaches for their knife block, and 9 out of 10 times, don't you choose the same knife? It's the one you're most competent with. It's the one that you know about. So these guys that are out there with their firearms, they've trained, they've requalified with their firearms, but they're not so good with their OC spray, or they realize that, I've only turn this on once or maybe twice, and maybe the OC spray they're carrying is now expired, they won't use it. But if they're taught and they have to show that competency, and they know, yes, it's going to hurt when you get sprayed. You know, you're going to learn that. But the more you use it, the better off you are out there. I think we produce a better product, a better licensed product, both for the consumer and for the employer. You see the fellows out there carrying firearms. We've seen cases, even in Sacramento, where a fellow was carrying a .45 compact 1911 model firearm and got in a firefight when it was his only weapon of choice. He had nothing else he could go to, and it's just scary. From the employer standpoint and the liability standpoint, we know historically the state has always said that it is on the employer. Everything is written. The 94 Act is written, so it's the employer's responsibility. And you smile at me very much often in the office and go, "It's your problem. Have a good time." And through Cal Sagan and the others, we realize it's our problem. But if we set a process up that's a simplified process, every weapon at your disposal, you must have a permit for, you must give a demonstration of competency for, and you must renew that demonstration of competency with us, then I think we're in really good shape. That's all I had.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. Hiram Libby, that's Hiram, last name Libby, Libby, Valiant Private Security. And
I'm sorry, what private security?
Valiant Private Security. Congratulations on the successful implementation of the things you've been implementing.
Thank you.
Very good
It
job.
was a group effort, most definitely.
Thank you for coming to speak at CalSAGA as well. That was a very informative talk that you gave.
Thank you.
So in terms of the Baton discussion, I got a number of points, but I'll try and limit what I'd like to say. We talk about, and you've talked here about the Baton, while potentially a lethal tool, being also a less lethal tool and a more intermediate level of force. And with the stated mission of the Bureau as consumer protection and protection from the types of hazards that might otherwise result absent that protection. More regulations that get added and the more cost that has to be borne by the personnel who are involved in what you described as the trenches could result in that person otherwise saying, I only have the funds based on the pay that the industry offers to acquire my firearms permit and firearm and related equipment as a last-ditch measure of saving my life. So I won't invest in the intermediate levels of force. And you then remove from the lexicon of that person's use of force the very levels of force that might prevent a lethal incident or issue. So I caution that, or at least hope that you would take into consideration that as well. The folks who are engaged in this really have very limited, in most cases, funds available to fund this type of extra training and licensing procedures. In terms of the license itself, when we talk about the different types of batons, one thing also to take into consideration is that there may be different applications for each baton. And there are indeed personnel in the security field, and I would presume also in the law enforcement field, that may carry more than one type of baton. And the reasons could be there could be different levels of force. For example, the type of force that you would generate with an aluminum PR-24 with a handbrake is going to be a different level of force, or the Peacemaker is going to be a different level of force than you might generate with a collapsed 16-inch expandable asp. And the use of force that you might want to apply could be a lower level if you have that tool available. But to regulate it to such a degree that you eliminate, and the guard has to choose between one or the other, I would presume the tendency would be, well, I'm going to go with that which will provide the highest level of protection to me as a person while I'm working, and I would then preclude the lower level of force, which again could keep me or keep the person from using a higher level of force with a more destructive tool. Or there are other possible applications for the different batons. A 29-inch second growth hickory baton might not be the baton that you would choose to use in a confined space, such as a healthcare environment where some of I share that experience. I worked for 11 years as security in a trauma center, so I know where you're coming from on that. And you might want to use a smaller implement rather than the fully expanded peacekeeper or a long baton or something that takes full destructive swings. So please factor that in to your decision-making process. And then I'll close with one final point here. Although the training is indeed different for the types of batons, I've been the student of many different types of baton training courses. There is so much overlap in so much common ground in those courses that perhaps the solution is to develop a course that encompasses general characteristics of use for all batons, including things like legal ramifications, what you described as a green zone or yellow zone, red zone, and the types of strikes, that sort of thing, and then include in that inclusive training course enough material to certify that participant in the course, that trainee, so that they are available or they're able to select or use at any time any of those implements. And in doing so, you could save enough money potentially off of the course for the guards that they could actually afford to do this. Remember that it's not usually the agencies. In the case of a law enforcement agency, the agency's paying for the training. But in the case of security personnel, it's usually the guard. So if you could factor that into your course development, there is so much overlap material that it should be possible to make one certify a guard in all three. I'll leave it at that in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Appreciate very much your comments. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chief and committee. G. Albert Howenstein, Jr., Howenstein. My background at 20 years as a municipal police officer, elected sheriff of Marin County, and then the founder and a former executive director of the California Association of Licensed Security Guards and Agencies, CalSEGA, as we know, as the premier representative for our security industry. A number of years ago, in working with one of your predecessors, when the first collapsible, I felt a little deja vu in the conversation, so excuse me for a little history here. When the collapsible baton first became semi-popular and looking as an option, I was working with the bureau chief trying to determine, what we would do in the licensure for the variety of batons. And after much machinations, he got back to me after review with legal counsel, and what the legislation says, a baton is a baton is a baton. And a baton didn't go into, it had all of these different ramifications. So as we were talking today, I love what the gentleman just said. What we wanted to get with the development of the baton manual was a comprehensive training tool that would demonstrate and have the student become proficient and knowledgeable about each of the potential weapons that they might use in the course of their duty. And once that certification is done, and of course that puts a burden on the Bureau as it relates to, one, the licensure of the trainer, to be sure that the trainer is knowledgeable and skilled in the particular device, and as well as in reworking and going through the baton manual to be sure that it makes sense and that it really is comprehensive in trying to meet what the goal is that we want to protect the consumer, we want to protect the public, we want to protect the employer, and we want to protect BSIS because we want to be sure that what we do in the licensing program meets an industry standard and makes sense. And I really, with my colleague Brian Baer, I appreciated deeply what he said, because when we have the continuing pendulum that keeps moving as it relates to the weaponry and that may be used in the industry, whether it's still in our law enforcement industry or in the private security industry, that we stay ahead of the curve as it relates to our knowledge of the potential use of those, and to have training to be sure that if we're going to do the escalation of force, which makes all the sense in the world, that you train the guard to move up the line, and that all training must be retrained at periodic intervals. There's nobody who is, and I know if I went back to the training that I had in 1959 as a police officer, my memory bank is not that good. But if I had it just a couple of years ago, it would still be refreshed. And I remember a couple of things about being a police officer that I will never forget as it relates to roles, responsibilities, and accountability. But at the same time, the nuances need to be carefully followed, carefully monitored, and it really puts a burden on the Bureau. But I think a burden that is part of what your requirements are as it states to your mission in licensing the private security industry. And we appreciate, very much what you do, and I appreciate your patience with me with my little walk down through history.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. Very insightful. Appreciate it very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Do we have any more public comment regarding this item? Seeing none, I would like to us for lunch. So it is 12:03. We'll be back here no later. We'll be back here at 1:05. Thank you. Starting back up just a little bit later than I announced earlier before lunch, but we are back from lunch recess and getting ready to start item 8, discussion regarding what training methods should be permitted to administer the powers to arrest course. So basically, the Private Security Services Act requires an applicant for a security guard registration to complete an 8-hour course in the exercise of power to arrest. The Act provides 9 specific topics that must be covered in the training and specifies that the majority of the course shall be taught by means of verbal instruction, including the use of the video presentation, and that's reflective of the statutory provision in the Act. The power to arrest training course must also be completed as a condition for obtaining an initial BSIS firearm permit. Bureau regulations specify that the powers to arrest training will utilize the Department of Consumer Affairs BSIS Powers to Arrest Training Manual and may include lecture, discussion, exercises, and role-playing. Further, Section 643B of California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Division 7 states that lecture and discussion is going to be on escalation and de-escalation techniques in the use of force, lecture and discussion in the use of restraint techniques and their implications, and discussion of trespass laws and the implications of enforcement. It should be noted that no reference is made regarding the use of video for the 4 hours powers to arrest training course related to powers to arrest. However, a video is noted for the 4 hours of the powers to arrest training course related to weapons of mass destruction and terrorism. The Bureau is aware of power to arrest trainers and providing the training entirely in a video format, with no instructor present, as well as online. At issue is whether these formats are appropriate as an effective training method for imparting the information to security guard registrants and firearm permit holders that are needed for them to understand the laws and implications of use and de-escalation of use of force. Additionally, as we consider whether online training should be allowed, then I would like to have the discussions also consider what are the appropriate safeguards that would need to be in place to ensure that the person completing the training is the only one that is the one and the same that is applying for the Bureau license, as well as ensuring that the person completed the course in its entirety. For example, it may be an 8-hour course. They can turn on the video, and if it's at home, walk away, come back in 7 hours and say they've completed the training. So the Bureau would like to hear thoughts from the committees regarding these issues that I presented. And I guess starting with the baseline of powers to arrest training, the importance of I guess what I would like to start with is hearing from the committee, particularly those involved in the training, on what are the important attributes of the power to arrest training as it relates to having that interaction with the instructor. And then after we kind of have a little bit of discussion on that, here, the pros and cons of potentially taking formats of that training and putting them into an online video environment or an internet-based environment. I'm sorry, an internet-based environment or some type of video environment for the training. You're up.
I believe that it's in classroom training. I think it's more beneficial than online. I mean, when I present my classes, it's on a PowerPoint basis, but I'm able to interact with my students and answer questions. And if they get confused about certain laws and all that stuff, I have heard about these online classes a couple years ago. Like you said, there's no way to track down if this person actually watched the course, or maybe we can allow the online course, but actually have the student come to the facility and take the exam, just to just to see if they pass. I mean, it requires 100%. I mean, it's still open book, but I believe that interaction with the students and actually sitting down in the classroom is probably the best route on this, other than auditing, making sure that the person taking the online course is the actual person doing it.
Chief, I have some comments as well, and I think I've been asking for this to be on the agenda for a while, so I appreciate you bringing this forth to the group and to the public here. But I strongly oppose online training for the initial 8-hour power to arrest and weapons of mass destruction training. I would support online training after the person is licensed for the additional 32 hours of continuing education. But for the 8 hours, the initial 8 hours, people are doing that online now, and it's posing a lot of problems. One, of course, we don't know who's actually doing the training. We don't know who's taking the test. And then the biggest one we're seeing now is they feel they've completed the training and now they're waiting for their guard card. So that's posing problems, I'm sure, at licensing. With an instructor, the instructor explains the process. I think one of the requirements you talked about there for 643B was discussion. I don't see how that they're going to be able to discussion with a PowerPoint or video that they're watching online. And then again, as far as the instructor explaining the process, okay, after you completed the class, here's your state application. I've signed your state application. Here's your live scan fingerprinting form. Now you need to go do your live scan fingerprinting and then do it online, which is highly recommended, or mail it in. When someone does online training, a lot of times they think they're done. They're waiting for their guard card. Most of the online training places that I'm familiar with, they don't answer their phone. They'll only respond to email. But once they have your money, they're done. So they're not going to help with the follow-up as far as what the person is supposed to do after they actually complete the training. But the big one for me is, validating who's actually taken the training and who completed the test, and allowing the person to be part of a discussion, ask questions, hear scenarios. There is some hands-on that is optional that's done in the guard card training. There's a search area in the power to arrest manual after someone's a private person can make an arrest for certain situations, a theft, for example. To search the immediate area for weapons. I mean, we physically demonstrate that and allow students to participate in that. So again, initial 8 hours I feel should be done in person in a classroom setting with a live person, and after that I would support online education. Thank you.
Thank you. What about the type of training where there's like a website, and I don't know what they're called, and I apologize. The course is held online, but there's an interactive instructor that's facilitating. Yes.
If there's some way to validate that person's identity, I mean, what are they going to show their ID next to their face? I mean, we know of situations where a son or daughter will take the training for a father or mother who does not speak English. And that's the only way that they were able to complete the 8 hours training and pass a test.
So what I'm hearing is, in order to maintain the integrity of the training, that the individual who's actually going to be out there performing the duties as a guard has in fact completed the training, that the only format that the committee sees, or at least these two members of the committee sees, is the actual physical presence in the classroom. You don't see any deviation that would be potentially So we know that the weapons of mass destruction is the 4 hours. Is there, again, they complete a certain part of the powers to arrest and then attest to completing, or I just want to hear. It should all be.
The weapons of mass destruction is a video for the most part. There's some areas in that video where you stop and discuss and ask questions, and that could be done online. Frankly, that part is very dry, and they have to watch the video. I mean, I could see someone doing that online once we validated their identity, but the real meat of it, the power to arrest manual, with rules, laws, and regulations, what a security guard can, cannot, and should not do. I feel very strongly that needs to be done in person after the participant's identity has been verified.
Thank you. In the law enforcement community, I mean, I think probably the biggest issue that we would have for the training is that employer knows, because they've got the individuals in a controlled environment carrying out the training. It's not open-ended. Do we have, I guess.
We actually do a lot of training, online training, but there's things that you sign and there's follow-up. I don't see employees in law enforcement cheating or trying to get past a 2-hour training and lose their job rather than just sit at your desk and watch it. But the onus and the liability is on our department and the sheriff. So I think it is important. I think they do the training, but I think it's the employer that should be responsible. They're the ones carrying the liability if somebody makes a false arrest. The employer and the business, my belief, should take the responsibility, and there should be some way of verifying the training, because ultimately it's for them. It's not for law enforcement. It's for the liability of the person or the private party arrest. Everybody has the ability to arrest. Every member of our society does, not just security. And they're the ones that are going to be liable and responsible for it when it's all said and done.
You raise a really good point, because I don't know if you recalled when we were talking about all the nuances of the Baton training, and where we talked about ultimately the way the Private Security Services Act is framed or structured is the onus is on the employer to ensure that the guard is properly trained. The guard does not provide any CE training to us, to the Bureau. It falls on the employer. There are provisions in the Private Security Services Act that says the employer, upon hiring a guard, is responsible for ensuring that guard has completed the powers to arrest training through the certificate. I think the issue that is now coming up with the online training is they may be able to present a certificate, but have they in fact completed the training? And to the extent of how it was tended to be put forth, because I agree there's merit to having that instructor engage with the student and ask the questions. And when I'm looking at the regulations, we're talking about role playing and exercises, and I don't see that carrying out in an online environment. So again, too, so in the way the Practice Act is structured, that if that guard is unable to provide that proof of the completion of training, is the employer then responsible as part of the hire to ensure that guard, even if they have to repeat it in order to be able to attest to it. So I think the biggest issue, and I think I'm hearing from the committee, is even the employers are kind of in a disadvantage the way the training is being provided, that there's not an assurance unless they have the guard every time upon employment repeat the training with the trainer, that they know specifically that individual has gone the full breadth of the 8-hour and all the aspects of what an in-person training activity would entail.
And there's employers that will not accept training certificates from online training providers because they cannot validate that training, or the participant doesn't have their training completion certificate, and that's required to be in their personnel file. So they end up having to send them somewhere else or do it themselves. The employer has to do it themselves.
So currently we know that they're out there. Some of them are doing, as you all know, that there is statutory law that basically says that anybody that is providing the security guard training, inclusive of the 8-hour powers to arrest training has to be a designated approved trainer by the Bureau. It's not an official license. The legislature did not establish it any more than the Bureau receives a request from an organization or a school or an entity to provide the power to arrest training. And we basically do a look at who's going to be the instructor, the facility, how it's going to be carried out, and we approve it. The approval is based on our understanding of in person, but we also know that they're morphing into online. So, any thoughts from the committee for being able to get help employers? I mean, what can we do? Well, one, I know what we need to do as far as potentially bolstering up the online activity. The regulations are broad. They're not specific. Yes, they talk about the contents of what's going to be provided in the training, but it doesn't talk about the method of how that training is to be given. And I don't know whether it needs to be as specific as to basically say, we update the regs to say that the training can only be in person, it cannot be in an online environment.
Well, Chief, I think you mentioned one of the regulations was discussion. I mean, I don't know how just that part of it happens with an online training. If they're watching a video or watching a PowerPoint, there's zero discussion.
Well, unless it's the scenario that we talked about where you log into a website where there's a facilitator leading the instruction, then there would be that discussion.
Right, but I don't know of any of those in the state, and I do a lot of research. It's all, they set up a website, they charge a very low rate. Someone can sign on in the middle of the night and complete their power to arrest and weapons of mass destruction training. If they were going to host a WebEx, they would have an in-seat class at their training facility or, hotel room that they rent out. They're going to go through that trouble and have a live person put on a class.
Well, my concern also is that I think there's many facilities out there that are not even approved by the Bureau, and they're providing it. And they're providing it, I would venture to say, that the cost of being able to complete something online is going to be significantly, it'll be very enticing to somebody that needs to satisfy the requirement. As we heard earlier from a public member, training, the cost, the burden of, bearing the cost of the training falls on the guard, and that can be create issues for the individual. So I think I'm hearing from the committee, and that the online, that there really isn't a place for it other than the weapons of mass destruction. The other part is so critical that includes role playing, answering what the law mandates, not only the B&P code but the penal code, and that there's no way at this point in time to see this hurdle that the individual that's completing the training online and taking the exam is one and the same who's going to apply for the guard card.
Correct. And you referenced, what does law enforcement do? And initial training, obviously, for law enforcement is at police academy. The ongoing training, you can log on to a post-learning portal and complete that. Bigger departments have their own systems, but initial training, of course, is going to be in an in-seat lecture, classroom type format.
And that law enforcement model is what I think I heard you say, that you believed for the initial 8-hour training, no deviation, in person. However, for the other continued security guard skills training, you see a place for it being an online training.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to change with times and with technology, but to me, validating that person, making sure, he or she is the person that is being certified and getting that initial power to arrest training in person is very important. And then after that, for the most part, they're employed. The employer, for the most part, provides that extra 32 hours of training. And now, again, the onus is on the employer. They may have their own portal that they can log on to or read through manuals while they're working. I think they can be trusted more once they're employed to do that additional 32 hours of training.
So out of curiosity, we all know it came out in the Sunset Report. We just recently went through our SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, for the purpose of the Bureau updating its strategic plan. And one of the comments that has resonated in both of those forums, and not just a couple of folks saying it, is that the Bureau lacks the resources to be able to do everything. You know, we have 60 staff, and we've talked about over 420, or about 385,000 licensees. Many of them hold multiple. I guess now I'm hearing that we do have these issues with the online training. What are things that the Bureau can use, opportunities, whether that be statutory regulation or just even getting the word out and partnering? Because I do believe the employer is pivotal. I agree with Captain Inglis that it is a liability issue for the company. I think you should be responsible for the staff, your employees, what you're putting out there, what they know. The Bureau's not going to be able to be in all places at all times. What type of ideas does the committee have forth to help us build that bench to be able to make sure that the employees that are completing powers to rest are completing the one that's in person in the full 8 hours? And again, that's not to take away that we might want to look at the regs to tighten it up, to give the Bureau some more teeth in being able to say that online training is not permitted. That's putting clarifying the requirement. But what are we going to do now to help implement it and roll it out? Do I have any thoughts or ideas?
The first thing that comes to mind is take the same path the Bureau did on simulators and initial firearms training. So there was communications that went out, there's letters that were sent, there was Facebook postings, there was letters to training facilities and training instructors clarifying that simulators could not be used for initial firearms training.
Okay, so now we've put the directive out there. We know that there's going to be always potentially trainers that are not approved by the bureaus that are providing the online training. We have a guard at home or an individual thinking about starting a new career in private security. They Google it, they come up, they see this real cost-effective training program, and so they do it. They get the certificate. Now the certificate, they go to the employer is saying, we've got, have you completed your 8 hours powers to rest? Yes, here's my certificate. What are things that we can do to help ensure? I think one thing is educate private patrol operators that we have an approved trainer list. That approved trainer list is now available on the Bris website. So unlike in the past, there was kind of this abyss of who was an approved trainer and who wasn't. So now you can go online, say, did this individual complete a training from an individual or entity that was approved by the Bureau? But what other things that we might be able to do to help ensure that that training was completed? Bureau can go out and we can do our inspections, but we already see that I've got thousands of licensees in the company arena. We've got 10 analysts on staff located throughout the state. We've got mandated firearm training, facility compliance inspections. We've got our investigations as well, and now we're going to start adding approved trainers. So the reality is, if we are going to look at this and start tightening it up, because we all, as an industry, agree that this is a huge liability, and we need to make sure that individuals that are out there have been properly trained on use of force, de-escalation, use of force. How do we together build something to help create a model that's going to help us with consumer protection, public safety? So again, like I said, and that's why I wanted to bring this forth. I mean, the Bureau, we work in our siloed world of, as the regulator, you're out there in the trenches. Based on what I'm hearing, and we haven't heard public comment yet, so maybe there'll be a little bit of deviation. But I'm hearing from an integrity of the training, that what's required to be trained can only be done in an in-person environment to do it effectively. So from the Bureau's perspective, if we need to tighten up some of the regs to ensure that that training is done in that format, we can do that. We also know that we have this new tool out there with Bris and being able to employer validate. But what can we do together to help ensure that that guard has obtained the training as it's intended to be provided? A hard one today, huh?
It is, but it can be pretty simple if the Bureau comes out with a stance that online training for the power to rest training is not appropriate, not allowed. And then at that point, it's communication with the PPOs. When I first got a guard card, I went into a security company and you take the test and it was like a 3-part form and here's your pink copy. That was your temporary guard card. There's no training, no live scan or anything. The difference now, the guard card is owned by the individual. So PPOs, security companies, for the most part, don't provide that training anymore because it's like a driver's license. I can take that, with this company, with that company, it stays with me. And so security companies, PPOs, have, when they do job fairs, for example, they say, oh, go see XYZ security training or ABC firearms training. They can help you get your guard card. They can provide you with the training for the guard card. So if the communication is out there that it's no longer allowed for the initial training, I think that's going to change what security companies, security employers are telling their people where to go get their training. It can't be anymore. Go on Google it, and go ahead and take your training, do your fingerprinting, come back and see us. Security companies have companies that they send their applicants before they're hired out to. Come back and see me when you get your guard card, is what they say. So they have recommended training facilities, firearm facilities, or companies that actually provide the guard card training for the large companies that don't have the time to do it. They need somebody today. They want somebody with their guard card. They can't wait a week, 2 weeks, 8 weeks until someone gets their guard card.
And certainly the Bureau can do that. I mean, if the decision is made that we are going to definitely go out definitively that online training is not going to be allowed for the powers to rest, we can certainly do the rulemaking package, similar to what we did with the firearm simulators. So that is doable. It will take, as you know, rulemaking takes some time. It took us about a year and a half, I think, from inception to get this thing out into now actually implemented. But my concern is still, and I guess we now have this other tool of educating the PPOs, the private patrol operators, about the approved trainers list that we now have. But still, ultimately, I think there's going to be, back to this comment, responsibility on the employer as well. So from the committee's perspective, then I think I'm hearing, hey, Bureau, I think no matter where the end goal is here, we need to take this first step. And then maybe once we take that first step, we revisit and start seeing what other things might need to be refined. Would that be accurate?
I just had a question. So the facilities that they go to currently some are approved by the Bureau and some are not?
So right now, firearm and baton training facilities are authorized to provide the powers to rest training. In addition, the private patrol operator employer, by the law, operational law, is authorized to provide the training. And then there's this third bucket of trainers, which are called approved trainers. And they're not an official licensee. They're just been given the Bureau's kind of like nod of, you can do this, to do the training. So a guard can go to get that 8-hour power to rest from any one of those 3 avenues. What's happening is, if the employer is not doing it, a lot of these individuals are going out, and for cost reasons, they're heading to the online because it's easier, and for other reasons they may want to complete it over going to in-person, 8-hour, and they have the certificate that says they've completed the powers to rest when in fact they really haven't. They've completed a course, but not the course as prescribed in regulation.
So it's not the same as like when we go and take a QM exam, like they verify our ID. Like that, then that's why you're saying it could be the son or the daughter that's actually doing the training, correct? And that's why you're recommending, if I'm hearing you correctly, that it be in person? Okay. Because it's different, because we have that in place for us. So when we go and take it, they actually verify. We can only go in person and they verify who we are.
No, that is correct. It's
Okay.
different from the qual. But in truth, this may be another situation again too, that when all this was put into place, there was no such thing as online training. The only way that anybody got any type of instruction was walking into a classroom, sitting in front of the instructor, and having that interactive engagement.
I was approached about maybe 5 years ago of a vendor that basically proposed to have an online course on my website. She said, "You're a licensed training facility, you're a licensed training instructor, you should get an online course." So he sent me a sample of the Powers to Arrest online course, and the PTA course, I literally finished it with the exercise and everything in like an hour and 20 minutes, just sitting there. And it will show you the percentage and the time. So they said, oh yeah, they can audit it where this, how long it took you to take the course. Not including the weapons of mass destruction. It's just the PTA course manual. This is your percentage, and you can, if you don't pass, if you don't score 100%, you can retake, and they can modify it to the point where they cannot speed it up. So for me, I'm kind of like, well, how do I know that that's the person who's taking the course? So, well, they have to contact you first. There's going to be procedures there on the website. On the link says they have to contact the training facility. You can either email your driver's license or your credentials to verify who you are. You take the course, and then the final exam has to be taken in your classroom facility. That's one of the, and I just didn't go that course just because of, one, it's expensive to do it. That's number one, and two, it's just there's no accountability on that. So I defaulted back to just you got to sit down in the classroom.
Well, and again, I still don't understand how even providing the driver's license and everything doesn't preclude another person to sit down and actually do the test.
So I'm going to jump in here because while the training, when it was contemplated back in at least the statutes that we have now, 1994, the internet wasn't ubiquitous and business wasn't generally run on the internet. We've come a long way in 22 years. California doesn't generally like to see, unless there is a concrete reason why, that we would foreclose alternative methods of training, of entry into the profession. So unless there is something that's absolutely critical about the training requiring it to be done in person, I'm not sure the Bureau would get a regulation restricting it to only in person across the board for all of the trainings, even if the identity is the issue, because there are solutions for identity. And the universities around the country have come up with various solutions for proving that the student who is enrolled in the class is the one actually taking the class, including having a proctor video monitor. So you have to take it from a computer that has a video screen so that you actually match the person taking the exam and is being video recorded matches the identity of the person who's registered for the course. So we need to be careful about foreclosing entry into the industry for an unrational reason. If taking it in person is critical, and we can demonstrate that it's critical, you can probably go down that path. For example, the firearm training has to be done in person because you can't actually go and fire a firearm unless you're on a range. So it's got to be done in person. But
I would think that if we're using use of force, arrest, restraint techniques, I would say, how can you demonstrate to an individual appropriate restraints?
Portions of the training that can be readily accomplished through electronic means, whereas other portions of the training may require actual classroom participation. And so it may come down to parsing out what portions of the training require physical in-person training versus the classroom type experience, which can be acquired through electronic means. And it's important to look at it from that perspective, because while on the one hand I can understand the concern about identity and whether or not they're actually getting what you expect, but there's no way, unless the Bureau is authorized to provide the training and control the training down to the letter, that we will ever have that kind of control. Part of this, and part of most industries, on the honor system.
Right. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you. I heard in the regulations very clearly, discussion and demonstration. How is that done? Online training, not a WebEx. I'm talking about online training.
Well, WebEx is online training, so I'm not sure what you mean. You're talking about video presentation.
I'm talking about sitting and watching a PowerPoint or watching a video, because that's what's happening right
A
now.
passive training. So that can be controlled to require it to be a non-passive environment, a non-passive experience. And there's lots of technological solutions to require actual participation.
So I guess what I'm hearing from counsel here is not necessarily that she's disagreeing with some of the discussion points put forward of the merits of having it in person. What I'm hearing from her is, from the perspective of the Bureau being able to promulgate those regulations, we're going to be able, we will need to demonstrate over and beyond just these logistical obstacles of the identity of the individual, that we need to be able, comparable to the firearm training, demonstrate that yes, the training can be provided in an online forum, but in doing so, we're compromising public safety, we're compromising consumer protection, because by not doing it in an in-person environment, that student is missing out on components X, Y, and Z that are critical when they're out there in the field. And if they've never had an opportunity to practice X, Y, and Z, or to have an interaction discussion, to be able to not just say, in every situation, you're going to react in this mode. Whereas when you have that interactive discussion, you can say, the instructor would say, well, yes, but not every situation is textbook classic exactly as it's presented here. And you need to be able to understand the nuances of what, so blah, blah, blah. So in essence, the rulemaking has to be the entirety of those discussion points in order for the be able to potentially move forward.
It has to, when you're going to restrict the technology that's in use, you're going to have to demonstrate by more than a gut feeling. There's going to have to be some empirical evidence there, and I'm not sure that we have it. But if you do, then we're going to need that empirical evidence in order to be able to justify restricting use of technology in these types of trainings. There are all sorts of standards that can be set, performance standards that can be set in order to establish that a trainer has confirmed the identity of the individual and require record keeping. There can be restrictions to allowing passive absorption of the information, to require active participation, and through the parsing out of what training must be done in the classroom versus what can be done online, that can provide more additional control. But a blanket ban on it is going to require some very hefty empirical evidence to demonstrate how the public will be harmed by allowing training which was intended to be done in a classroom, which generally suggest, I mean, these are not all experiential. So we're not dealing with these being in a laboratory environment where somebody is demonstrating their skills. A lot of this is sitting on your rear end, absorbing the information from a lecturer. And there's no reason why that can't happen through technology.
And I would piggyback off of your comment to say that the rulemaking package that we just promulgated that went into effect relating to the firearm training course, I don't know if you've any noticed, but there are areas of the training where the Bureau, and it went to the Office of Administrative Law, and it was passed, where we said this part, the only means in which it can be trained is in a classroom environment. And I believe, and Sam can correct me, and he might be able to clarify more, that classroom environment was instructor based only? Yes. Yes. So again, these are doable, but it's just how we need to frame the need.
Yes.
If I could just make a comment, is there any consideration of splitting the two and have power of arrest be in the classroom, and then have the weapons of mass destruction be online, but then use the classroom facilitators to police, lack of a better word, the online system? So they would, in essence, be vouching for the online systems. So if I go to a particular service and get power of arrest, I do that in person. That's very important. I can see that there's reasons for doing that in person, but then if there isn't any reason for doing it online, for not doing it online, we allow this other portion of it to be online, and then kind of the regulation is industry regulated from that point of getting the facilitators, the people that are already providing part of the legislation, to actually partner with those online services. they're obviously going to want to partner with good online services and make sure that they have everything that's checked off that they need or they think employers are going to need. Otherwise, that first part of it is not going to be valid. I was just trying to keep
No,
the
and I
keep the
think
bureau out of, hey, how do we authorize these online guys and how do we police this? You know, there's no enforcement dollars in the budget, so kind of push that off and get the facilities to basically run through and serve as a validating entity for that online service. Then you can allow the online service. That gets a foot in the door for the online service. Then we're not saying completely a no to the technology, which technology is here and it's only going to get better. So we're kind of pushing sand against the tide.
no, and I hear you, Lynn, and I think I actually heard a little bit early on in the discussion with Matt. I think it was Matt that commented that as far as the weapons of mass destruction, it's a video anyway. It's a video format. Yeah, there are points in the video that are stopped, and to give an opportunity to have a little lecture discussion type of dynamic going on. And I think I heard from him saying that as we look at this would be a viable way of maybe incorporating a little bit both worlds. But I think you're agreeing as well that there are aspects of the training that will never be substituted in an online environment. The hands-on, the pressure. Oh, no worries. No worries. So just let known for the record that at 1:55.
I guess I was just trying to have a validating perspective from the power of arrest facilitators, and if they can be the gatekeeper for the second half of the training, which would be online, that would help validate that online service. So I've taken the power of arrest, I've taken it through Simon's firm, we've done that in person, and then Simon says, and to get me to sign off on this complete power of arrest, which includes weapons of mass destruction, you're going to go take it at ABCD online services, and if you take it anywhere else, I'm not going to accept it, and you're not going to get signed off on that. Just an
No,
idea.
I think
This isn't my business.
This
by
is
any-
what this is all about, is the open forum, and I really appreciate the suggestion. Again, in honor and respect of the comment that was made earlier by a public member about being cognizant of the costs that could ultimately the security guard may be required to bear. These type of hybrid type of training models provide a little bit of the needs, addresses the needs, but also actually both needs.
Chief, if I may comment too, so just reading the code, because I'm not familiar with what you do, but 75963 through 7 does say a bureau approved facility. And of course, this was written, like you said, 20 years ago, Sheila, right? But obviously it's not applicable to today. But it's saying that the training facility, obviously, it was designed back then to be in person, and I understand your concerns. But it's through by an approved facility throughout the code. And so as the years have gone by, there's been facilities that, like you said, they've just been like, okay, they've gotten a handshaker or just an okay, you can do the training. That would be, I think, a concern in protecting the consumer as well, that, if they're going to these places that aren't obviously able to really identify who they are, if it's not an approved by the Bureau, as the code is stating, approved by the Bureau, then that would be a concern, I would think, too. So if it takes a year.
And thank you. So, and that was, again, giving more tools for folks, in particular the private patrol operator, to know who's approved or not, was having the approved trainers now on the Breeze website available.
And I know you said it takes a year, about a year and a half, but I think it looks like if you're bringing it up to today's technology, because this was written, some of it says, I think, it's some of it's actually been over 20 years ago, that just, it might take that long to fix it all and bring it up to where we're at today.
I just wanted to add my comments as well. I'm a proponent of online training. I recognize that Post Police Officer Standards and Training offers many of its courses now online, except for the initial academy. I'm also concerned about the quality of the training that might be provided both in person or through an online program. I mean, how many of us have sat through a class and thought, that's a great subject, but a horrible instructor, and I got nothing out of it as a result? Ideally, it would be nice if we had a standardized video, that everybody saw the same video on powers of arrest, and it was comprehensive, Ideally, it was if we had the same instructor teaching every security officer, which is not possible, so that the quality of instruction and the standard of that instruction was consistent across the board. But that doesn't exist. And ideally, every security officer, whether that officer be in Sacramento or Los Angeles or Victorville or off in some remote region, be able to afford or attend an in-person class. But I know of areas when I worked with a security company where we had a very difficult time getting security officers into training because they were so far removed from our training facility. So those are all challenges that we face with this minimally paid industry. So I'm anxious to hear from the public if any members from the industry are going to stand up and talk about this. But my thoughts are, if the training is already, if we've already gone well down the road of online training, and I believe, like Council suggested, there are ways of, and others too, there are ways to validate whether John or Jane, who took this instruction online, actually know the subject, and that's by going to a site or a place just for that time necessary to take that validation exam and verify it through the license. Will people get around that? Oh, sure. People are very smart and they'll find ways around it. But I think that's the smaller part of the universe that we're talking about.
So let me. I just want to clear, just to restate to make sure I understand. So let's just say hypothetically, the weapons of mass destruction video is a standardized video. There's no deviations from it. It was developed. It was way before my time, but it was developed with law enforcement, BSIS staff, post staff, peace officer standard training for individuals not familiar with the acronym POST, and it's standardized. So what I think I'm hearing from you is we do something similar for the powers to rest when we're talking about the law, the legal implications, all the things that, techniques, verbal techniques for de-escalation, all of that can be trained in an online environment. However, ultimately, in order to protect the integrity of it, we now have to have that individual be able to go in, take the exam, demonstrate he's the one that's completing the exam. Potentially, part of that training would include some hands-on. Now it's the time to practice the exercise of the restraints and controls, have that interaction with the instructor. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Any thoughts? Trainers? That kind of a training model? The part that I like about that is that the certificate of completion would not be given to the student until such time. It has to come from an actual instructor where that instructor has had that face-to-face time and some interaction with the individual. Any other comments? Well, we've been getting some really great stuff here. A lot more. You guys touched on issues that I wasn't even thinking about, so I really appreciate your insight. So at this time, see no further comment from the committee. I'd like to know any comment from the public regarding this section, item 8.
Yeah, my name is Brian Bear. But I'm a qualified manager for SmartGuard and 40 years in the industry. To full disclosure here, I created an online presence and website 10 years ago. We came to the Bureau, Mr. Howenstein and I felt that there was a way to do it. So we sat down with the Bureau and they said, okay, we'll approve Mr. Howenstein to be your instructor. Let's go figure out how to do this. So we set up the program. It's called eduguard.com.
Called what?
Eduguard.com.
H or H?
EDU.
Oh, EDU.
Like eduguard.com. So when we set it up, it's gone through some iterations. And we found that the big deal of having to know who you're training is very, very important. We also found that the interaction courses that would be required are something that the employer, who is ultimately the one responsible, should be taking care of and going through. What I found in the trenches and why I initially created it was I sent 4 Eagle Scouts over to a training center in West Sacramento. Class started at 8:30. They picked up a check from my office at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 11:30, they came back. I said, "You got a break for lunch?" They said, "No, we're done." I said, "Really?" They gave me the certificates. I ripped them up. I said, "Go get a pizza and go in that other room. I'll see you guys there about noon. And by 8 o'clock tonight, you guys will then have your certificate. Till then, you can't." So I knew there needed to be something. You know, technology now allows us to buy anything. Amazon can verify who we are and have a big screen TV to our house in an hour. There's no reason we can't, with all the legislation or with all the new technology, have the same type of thing. Breeze was a big step for us. The industry took it well. I think the industry is ready to make more steps that direction. We can certainly identify and verify who is behind the other side of a computer screen. You can do it through proctoring. You can do it any given way you want to. We just need to regulate it. Once you regulate it, we'll be in better shape. What we're running into now, the problem is the training as a whole, whether it's a PPO or whether a guy gets a PPO exam and then throws up a website. There's a lot of them. Kid will come in and he'll say, "I went to XYZ training school. I did it." Okay, great. How long did you take to do the powers of arrest? Hour and 20 minutes. Wow, you're pretty good. Great. You'll need to redo that. And when you redo it, you can either do it in person at any school you'd like to, or you can do it at edgeguard.com. It's going to require you to take those the full time. You're going to have to be required to pass it with 100%, and then you're going to be able to come back here and I'm going to look at you as an employer. Well, I've already got my guard card. I don't care. That doesn't matter, because the onus from the direction from the state of California is I, as your employer, am liable for your training. So we send them out. Guys that come in with their 40 hours of training, and I've called Laura on this a couple times. I asked her, I said, "Give me a one-word answer for what you call a fellow that took got 32 hours of certificates in an hour and 50 minutes by somebody giving him a packet when they walk through the door." She came up with the same word I did, fraud. And it absolutely is. And we see it every day. The biggest issue we need to do in regulate and training is, yes, progress forward so that we're doing the best possible training. And if it's standardized to be online, that's great. Anything that needs to be taught in person should be taught in person. But we have to see what's actually being taught to the guards now and enforce it. These fellas that can, these large, and some of them are pretty big companies. When you and I talked about it, these are big companies. They got 1,000 employees. The 7 employees that I interacted with would have spent a total of 11 hours between the 7 employees to get their 32 hours each. It's impossible. And worse than that, it hurts our industry. We need to be able to take the schools and say the schools are proper. So if you as a PPO teach somebody and it's proven that you did that wrong, you're no longer allowed to teach your own employees. Your license is now restricted from that, and you need to send your employees out to be trained by a third party who's approved by the Bureau. And that's every employee you currently have. If you've got 1,000 employees, you need to go send them out. It's your cost, it's your fine, it's your responsibility. When we get to a point where we're there, then we can really get the regulation for the training under control and find new methodologies for it. The online, in doing it for so long now and over the last 10 years, I think a discussion period would be great, either through WebEx or through, this is the given time, we'll give instruction every week. You can pass your stuff and we'll have a 4-hour online discussion from 3 to 7 on Fridays. And we don't issue certificates until after that's done and a demonstration of competency is completed. That's the biggest thing. For powers to arrest, it's always been kind of fun, because for those of you who've been around a long time, and it's published, the powers to arrest book comes out, it's online, and the answer key is online. So anybody that wants to download it could do it.
We pulled it. And since I started there, we pulled it.
So it's changed now, and the new one different, but that's the way it was forever. And thankfully now it's not that way, but we left those big blanks and those big holes out there for everyone to have. Cal Sagan, when they first started trying to do their training, they were selling the training materials as a whole. And Roy, if he comes up to testify, will tell you that if you go to YouTube, you will find all their training that someone has posted. It's all there already, as well as the answers to powers to arrest and anything else you want to find. If someone wants to cheat the system, they're going to do it. It's up to the employer to be savvy enough to detect that and to deal with their employees.
And I would argue not just savvy enough, but care enough.
Absolutely. And that's...
I would argue,
I didn't
again,
wanna say
going
that.
back to this partnering here, it can't be a
Right.
one-way street where there's an expectation the Bureau is going to take care of it all, because it's unrealistic. And going back to, how do we partner? How do we partner?
Exactly. And I think the way you partner is to have an advisory board that has people from all the industries and invite people to come in and talk about it and find new solutions to it. And I think that's great. Now we just have to find a way to enforce it or to pay for the enforcement, whether that's through fines or whatever it's through. We need to find a way to really get it handled. These employers that are passing out the exam and paper and just, here you go, fill it out. That's your 32 hours. It hurts us all. Because then when the people come to us, I tell them, I really like the fact that you did this, but you don't have your annual training for the last 4 years. I'm going to want you to take it all again and give me a demonstration of competency that you understand each of the topics. I need to know that you understand powers of arrest. I need to know that you understand, the law. And I think that's what we all have to do. But the more regulation we can get in that respect, and I'm not a regulation kind of guy, folks. I'm not that fella. I don't really like regulation. But in this particular situation, I think it's necessary for safety and creating a level playing field for all people participating, and absolutely to save the consumer, not just the person who's the guard is protecting, but the guard being the consumer himself, because they really think that they can take that online course and know what it is to do out there in an hour. They can't. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Shane M. Clary, Vice President of Bay Alarm Company. And I'm not going to really talk about powers of arrest. I'm going to talk more about just online training. I've been in the alarm industry for 43 years now, but I've also have been a university instructor, and also for the past 15 years been involved with the Western Burglar and Fire Alarm Association Unilateral Apprenticeship Training Program. That is an apprenticeship program for the electrical part of the industry, mainly for fire alarm, that's now regulated through Department of Industrial Regulations, the famous blue card for the fire alarm and life safety technician. We started a program about 15 years ago, and at that point it was the traditional classroom with the instructor. And that's what I was used to when I was working on my doctorate and stuff. Was a TA, everything was classroom, and this was also prior to the internet. This is back in the 70s or so. Our program is, and this is statewide, so we did have an issue, and I think it was alluded to, about getting all of your students in a classroom if they're spread across the whole state, which goes from the Oregon border to the Mexican frontier and every place in between. We then, in conjunction with the California Community College Chancellor's Office, which regulates or oversees our program, we developed an online program. And it was our understanding the first online program that was approved through the Division of Apprenticeship Standards for apprenticeship training. And we've been on online program for about 6 to 5 years. We still do have to have some stuff, and I understand the in-person stuff. We do that through labs for our midterms and our finals, when the students do come in, because a lot of stuff for electrical safety, the Electrical Code, NFPA 72, which is the fire alarm standard and stuff like this, it can be done online. We use what's called, by the way, there's synchronous online training and asynchronous online training. One is where it's just basically you're looking at a PowerPoint you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and do it or whenever, versus you do have an instructor. We have kind of a blended program. Parts of it is you can do when you want to do, whenever you're available. We do have the once a week. All the students come onto a portal and they have interaction with the instructor. The other part, though, is the laboratories. Conduit bending and stuff like that, ladder safety and similar stuff. You do have to be able to do the hands-on. So that's when they come in to a classroom environment for the laboratory stuff. For our examinations, it is a proctored exam where they have to where we know who they are. They got to show their ID and stuff like that. Another way, of course, to do that, you already use. I think, in fact, I've done it when I took the QA exam. QM exam through getting the name of the company right now. We have to go in and do your computerized testing. We got to show 2 forms of ID and everything else like that. So that could be done for the testing. But I think that as we evolve technology-wise, that we do probably have to get more into the online side training. I mean, I think that's the way a lot of things are going. Even now, at the university level, a lot of classes are now online. My degrees are in geography and economics, so it doesn't require much laboratory stuff, but a lot of the classes, could be now taken are online. I know that there's even now a lot on electrical safety or electrical NEC stuff can be done online. Fire protection engineering, which is another I have gone into. A lot of those classes, even for a master's degree, is done online. So I think that, and this is a big state, lengthwise, not so much on the width. So I think it would allow easier for an employer to get their individuals trained to a certain level before they have to do maybe some parts being in person. I mean, I did go through the powers of arrest class years ago, back in the 70s, when I used to carry a firearm when I was a responding alarm agent. I haven't done that for now about 30 years, so I haven't had to renew that kind of stuff and don't even have any guns anymore. But I think that the regulations do need to be changed to kind of catch up with technology. And thank you.
Thank you so kindly. So we're getting up onto about 2:15. I've been allowing about 5 to 6, 7 minutes for each testimony so that we can continue moving forward with the other items on the agenda.
I'll do my best to stay within your timeline,
Thank
Chief.
you kindly.
Thank you very much. First thing I would like to say is please review the weapons of mass destruction film. It is so outdated that it really is no longer maybe consistent. It really needs to be brought up to date. And besides, they can maybe get your smiling face on the introduction. So, hey, the things about you've put together a facilitator's manual for the weapons of mass destruction and for the powers to arrest. And what we did when Brian Bear was talking about, when he approached me and asked me if I would work with him in developing, quality training for the security industry with my belief and my 10 years of working to improve the industry, working with CalSega in your office, one of the things that I was always concerned about was the quality of training. What we found that while in online training, today we can verify, the identity of the trainee in many, many ways technologically, and that is just outstanding. Intertwine the facilitator role with the student. The student can have interaction with the facilitator by sending electronically the questions of their concerns and get the issues and the answers back. So the interplay can occur without any break at all in the kind of training that we want to have. I like the gentleman over here. When I started and founded CalSega, somebody asked me, this is after my retirement from the government services as the executive director of the Governor's Office of Criminal Justice Planning, and I said, I'm retired and I'm done. And they said, what do you think of the private security industry? And I said, little, nothing, figuratively and literally. And that was when the standards were so minimal that they were almost laughable. I took the powers to arrest test. I had to drain my brain in order to pass the test, and I missed 2 questions because I was still thinking like a cop. But it said to me, the industry needs better training, needs quality training, and needs to have the venues for training that make it easy, good for the student, good for the regulators, good for the industry, good for the private patrol operator, and good for the guard. So I have two granddaughters. One were finishing her master's program and one finishing her BA program, and both of them have been taking a number of classes online. And if it's good enough for the universities of Arizona and Oregon, we need to be able to find a way to do it with quality in the state of California. And I think the training industry, working with your office and your advisor group, can continue to improve the quality of training, the quality of presentation of the training, and the guarantee that the trainee is the one who got the training. The one who with the certificate is identifiable, the one who did the work. And it can be done. Work on the facilitator manual, get the interplay back and forth, and we can have a much better and much higher quality training and higher quality industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to pause for 1 second where council is going to be changing out here. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Again, Hiram Libby, Hiram, last name Libby, Valiant Private Security. And just a couple of comments on the topic here. There may be some benefit of gleaning information from oversight bodies that already use verification measures as to the types of training that might be provided to security personnel. Specifically, I'm thinking about the allusions that have been made in this meeting several times to law enforcement and the post agency, officer standards and training. And there are many courses that post offers that require a verification of who the person is who's taking the course. Same could there may be some benefit to not going to reinvent the wheel, but kind of colluding with the other agency to see if there are verification measures that could be initial training, and then also for the ongoing, whether or not it's in person or online. And along with that, you might elect to use, for instance, a guard card number or PPO number as in effect what Post uses as a post number for the individual. State would have a record of what training that person's.
We do. So the powers to arrest the guard application does have that information, and that's captured and put into the database. So if anything down the road with the guard, we have an ability to go back to talk to the training facility if needed, if that's where the investigation needs to go. So
right. And for instance, if you were to perhaps look at, say, the post record of Captain Inglis or Chief Perez, there'd be a number of courses listed over their career, dozens and dozens of courses in various topics, everything from WMD to Baton training, firearms, powers to arrest, all sorts of things.
Right.
Beneficial. I'll limit it to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, my name is Roy Ron. I'm the Executive Director of CalSega, California Association of Licensed Security Agency Guards and Associates. And thanks to my good friend Brian Bayer, I felt the necessity to come up and defend myself. CalSega is a proponent of online training, and I do believe as we move forward, it would be important for us to partner and make sure that the online training is given in the appropriate way. When 2880 was initially passed, CalSega developed 27 training modules for our membership to be able to use. And as Brian mentioned, one of the problems we have with that is that if you go online and Google CalSega training, you can get the answers to all the exams You can run off your own program, and it's a very difficult program for us to administer. In keeping with that, a couple of years ago, we went out to bid for an online training partner for the association. And one of the things we found as we were going through that is that there exists any number of ways to verify who is taking the training that the Department of Motor Vehicles in California has used for a number of years for some of the online work that they do. So again, we are proponents of online training. We want to do it appropriately and properly. And one of those things is making sure we know who is taking the exam. We don't take that lightly. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you know other testimony? Well, I want to thank everybody for the very one more. Sorry, I apologize.
Hello, thank you. My name is Julie Al-Hunady. I'll spell that. A-L-Huneid as in David I. I'm the applications manager for EduGuard. And I just wanted to clarify that the decision on how to verify a student who's taking our courses, we've implemented a system of 5 security questions that are randomly selected by the software for the user to answer during an exam in a course. So each course has several exams for each part, and they have to complete each part. And then they take that exam, and they're not allowed to go on to the next portion of the course. And at that time, they're asked these security questions. Now, so we have 5 questions that kind of rotate. So, I mean, you can ask yourself, you know, the questions, well, what if they told somebody their answers, but they don't know when they're going to come up? So, I don't know. We have found that we did look into using the verification with the photo ID next to their face on a, proctoring. And the cost per individual is $75 for the proctoring. And so when we talk about these different courses that have all these different exams for each section of the course, if it's $75 a verification, an exam, then it becomes cost prohibitive to the officer. So that is why we went with the security questions. Then as to the remark that was, you could turn on a video, go get pizza, do your laundry, come back, it's done, take the test, and you never really watched it. We've set ours up so that you have to, well, first of all, each is basically a slide. It's on the screen for so long, and then you time out. So if you don't touch the screen, and we have interactive questions throughout the course, so you have to answer, something that just was on the previous screen, just so you kind of have some comprehension. And so if you don't do that, then you're timed out, and you have to start all over again. So I'm not saying that these are the best solutions. I'm saying that these are some solutions to address these questions that have come up in the evolution of the online courses. And then as to the officers, my heart really goes out to them, and I try to help them. I do walk many of them through the application process. They call the office. Our office hours are on our Facebook page, and if I am on the phone, and I'll get a message, and then I'll call them back. So I have walked many through the fingerprint process or the application process, any part of the whole process. So, and I get, a lot of them have misinformation, and they've gotten it from employers, They've gotten it from other training facilities, whether online or brick and mortar. So, yeah, I really would like to see it regulated, and if for no other reason, for the officers, because, you know, they really want to do this job, and I want to help them do it well and be prepared and not be surprised or not be swindled. And
Thank you so much. Any other testimony regarding this item? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead now to move to item 9. And I realize we are getting close to 2:30, and generally we're adjourning shortly around this time, so we're going to see. I'm going to cut some of my presentations in order to allow Sam to do his presentation. But item 9 is just basically an update on the new firearm requalification requirements for eligibility to renew a BSIS permit. As I mentioned in my Bureau update, the new requirement went into effect January 1. Basically, the new requirement talks about some changes in the method of the training, which we discussed in the powers to arrest, where certain sections are classified as classroom, but more importantly, the use of the simulator. So Sam Studulski is Policy and Admin Manager at the Bureau.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we submitted a letter to all training facilities back in December that kind of outlined what exactly this regulatory proposal did. We conducted our hearing last May. Our package was approved this fall by the Office of Administrative Law. It was filed with Secretary of State and is now effective as of January 1 of this year. So one of the things that this package did was we actually created a definition section in our regulations to actually provide a definition for a firearm simulator. It provides definitions for traditional classroom instruction as well as non-traditional instruction. We defined firearm range and firing range as being the same thing. We provided a definition for live ammunition, range qualification, and initial range qualification so that we could really put some descriptive language in the regulations so that there weren't any gray areas. One of the main proponents of this package was that the initial range qualification has to be completed with live ammunition. They cannot qualify with the firearm simulator. Moving forward from that, as far as each range qualification that they have to complete in order to renew the firearms permit, at least half of them each year. So 1 out of 2 every 12 months has to be with live ammunition. So we left the option in there for them to do some firearm simulator qualifications. However, we bolstered the definition of a simulator so that it's not the equivalent of duck hunt. It's something a little more elaborate that can really be useful. From there, we went and we tried to improve the renewal section as it pertained to the training requirements. So in order to renew your firearms permit, you have to complete two qualifications each year, and before you actually go out and shoot, you have to do a 2-hour refresher course on the de-escalation of force. So one of the issues we were running into is people would go to the facilities and then they'd have a hard time getting verification that they completed that training. Or they would go to the training facility and say, hey, I did it with my employer, they gave me the 2-hour training, I'm good to go. Well, there's a lot of discrepancies there, so we actually changed the regulation to specify they need to do that de-escalation training with the training facility. So moving forward, training facilities are going to need to verify and provide that 2-hour refresher course each time they come in for a requal. From that, we also wanted to be very specific, and this goes back to what Laura had mentioned about updating the applications. They are required to have a signed certificate that they completed that requal each time. And we actually specified that in the regulation that they are to receive a signed copy of their firearms qualification each time they go to the range. And then one of the other areas that we wanted to address was the use of targets. Historically, the actual regulation specified in section 635, which is the complete training outline, gave 2 specific targets that were required to be used. And this became problematic because they weren't necessarily the most easily available. So we were hearing anecdotally from different people that they were hard to come by. They were expensive. So we looked at those targets. We looked at what some of the standards are with post and what a basic silhouette target looks like and what most scoring requirements are. And we created a new section, which is outlined as 635.1 in our regulations, where we prescribe basic dimensions for a target. So instead of having to be this target or that target, they need to qualify on a basic silhouette target that fits within this range to this range, whatever size requirements. And we wanted it to be somewhat at the discretion of the instructors to decide if you're going to have, a smaller target, larger target, whatever that's going to be. You're the one certifying their training. You're the one that's saying this person is meeting standards. We just wanted to make it more available for the guards and a little more cost effective. I think that's most of it. Any questions?
Comments from the committee? Question or comments from the public? Moving on to item 10, discussion regarding implications of reorganizing a business structure of an existing licensed entity. So the Bureau is becoming aware either through documents that a licensee files with the Bureau, such as their renewals or notices of changes in their qualified manager, their address change, name change, as well as through the course of a compliance inspection or even an investigation of a growing number of company licensees reorganizing the business structure of their license. These licenses include the private patrol operator, firearm and baton training facilities, alarm company operators, locksmith companies, repossession agencies, private investigators, and proprietary security employer. When the Bureau issues a license to an entity for the business structure specified on the application and which is authorized by the Respective Practice Act, these structures include sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, and in the case of alarm companies and private investigator companies, limited liability companies. Changing the business structure of an existing license essentially constitutes the assignment or transfer of the license. The Private Security Services Act and the Locksmith Act specifically prohibit the assignment of a transfer of the license. The Alarm Company Act and the Collateral Recovery Act, as well as the Private Investigator Act, does authorize the assignment or the transfer of the license. However, that can only occur when the direct and indirect owners of the assigner, which is the entity that existed before the transfer, are identical to the direct and indirect owners of the assignee, which is the business structure after the transfer, and only with prior approval by the Bureau. So what this is basically coming down to is if we have entities that start as the sole owner and decide to incorporate, then that changes the business structure of the license, and accordingly that license is no longer doing business, it's not conducting its business in accordance with the law and could be construed as essentially aiding and abetting unlicensed activity. Basically, the license that was issued to the original business structure is aiding and abetting unlicensed activity to the new structure. If a PPO or locksmith licensee changes its business structure, it must apply for a new license, and the reason for that is because that license cannot be assigned. If an alarm company operator, repossession agency, or PI licensee changes the business structure of its license without prior approval to the Bureau, then it's assigned the license and is no longer conducting business in accordance with the law, and again, is essentially aiding and abetting unlicensed activity. If an alarm company, repossession agency, or PI licensee changes its structure and is not eligible to assign the new license, specifically because the ownership is not the same before and after the transfer, then that entity must apply for a new license. In those cases when the Bureau does become aware that a company has reorganized its license or the business structure associated with the license, we issue a letter requesting information from the licensee to confirm within a specified time that it has not changed its structure, or if it in fact has changed it, to submit the appropriate documents and fee to either assign the license if that Practice Act allows for the assignment, or that entity has to apply for a new license. Long and short, if you are finding yourself in that situation, please contact the Bureau so that we can guide you into getting your license, whether that is executing an assignment if appropriate, or getting you through a new license, so that we make sure that you're operating in compliance with the law. If you're considering making a business structure change, it would behoove you to contact the Bureau before you make such changes in order to make sure that you're proceeding in a way that's in compliance with the law. So very short presentation, just directly from me, no commentary, and at this point, any questions or comments from the committee regarding what I just shared? Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, we're going to go on to item 11. Please be advised that we were going to be looking at the Consumer Guide to Vehicle Repossession during the lunch break. An issue was raised regarding the document, and we are not going to consider it today. So accordingly, I need to ask for a motion from a committee member in a second to remove this item from the agenda.
I'll make a motion to move it, Chief.
Okay. Can I have the roll call for the purpose of a vote?
Simon Cruz.
Oh, I'm sorry. I need to restate the motion. So the motion before the committee is to allow us to take item 11 off the agenda for today. So please call the vote.
Simon Cruz.
Aye.
Marcel Egley. Matthew Lujan.
Aye.
Todd Inglis.
Aye.
Lynn Moorfield.
Aye.
Stan Perez.
Aye.
6, yes.
Okay, so we do have, the motion passes on a 6 vote, and that is quorum. We're barely at quorum right now. Okay, item 12, we're going to give a brief update on the BSIS law enforcement fact sheet. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to give any introduction. I'll just let Sam come up and present what we've done with what the law enforcement fact sheet looked like during the prior meeting and what is before the committee today.
All right, so if everybody remembers, last year we had started this endeavor as being a fact sheet for law enforcement officers because we get a lot of questions about the different security industries, who needs to be licensed and how. So we had a couple attempts at putting this together. We presented it to the committee. We got a lot of good feedback, and based on some of the recommendations from this body as well as some of the public comment that we received, we kind of went back and made some alterations to it, and we realized that we needed to come at it from the aspect of being more of who needs to be licensed and base it on the activities that are being done so that it was easier to understand for most. So if you look at the version that you have, that's where we're at now, where we really tried to break it up based on the 2 different practice acts. So we really wanted to go in there and say, okay, what is a private patrol operator? What are their guards and what can their guards do? What is a proprietary employer? What can they do and what are their employees? One of the key components is that we realized is we needed to get down to the bottom where we needed to really establish what the exemptions were from licensure. We get calls from law enforcement frequently, I have this situation, this scenario going on. Do they need to be licensed? And we have to go, okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? So we tried to put as much information here to where we really spell out the difference between the proprietary security officer, what a security guard is, and when does it trigger the requirement for a PPO license. So I hope we have everything on here. Like I said, we really wanted to focus on the nuances between the 2 different practice acts and really wanted to add that exemption information.
And just for clarification, we understand that the last time the input that we received from law enforcement was this wasn't user friendly, and we understand that. And so if the motion is to adopt, if we do adopt this document today, our next step is to be working with our publications unit here in the department to bring this down into a pocket-sized version. So basically, you're looking at the content, not how pretty it is. And again, as Sam said, we wanted to bring in the feedback from the last committee hearing was that the broader citation authority in the Business Profession Code was not cited. We just cited the authority that was in the individual practice acts we regulated. That's been included. And more importantly, based on the questions we usually get from law enforcement that relates to frequently the bouncer, the bar type scenarios, those type of situations, we felt it was important to add the exemption clarification on that. So do I have any questions from the committee regarding any of this? Do I have a motion from the committee to adopt the law enforcement fact sheet?
So moved.
I second it.
So before I take a vote, do I have any comment from the public regarding the law enforcement fact sheet? Seeing none, call the vote.
Simon Cruz,
Aye.
Marcel Egley, Matthew Lujan,
Aye.
Todd Inglis,
Aye.
Lynn Moorfield,
Aye.
Stan Perez.
Aye.
6-0, the motion passes. We're moving right along now. So item 13, public comment on items not on the agenda. So this is public's opportunity to come up. Please state your names and again spell it for the record and give us your concept or idea.
Thank you. I forgot to spell my name the first time. Just one question. And sometime in the future, does the BSIS contemplate requiring that all applications go?
So you're posing a question to the committee that's not on the agenda today, and accordingly I cannot respond. That would need to be noticed in a Bagley-Keene environment because we are governed by Bagley-Keene. If you'd like to submit an email, we'd be happy to ask. If you'd like to have further discussion on whether that would be something of merit, you can certainly present it as a future potential discussion for the committee. So either format, just let us know if you want to put it on the record for a potential future discussion or whether you want to just discuss the issue with us one-on-one.
Do I do that right now? Just
You can say right. So you providing input is perfectly acceptable, but my responding to it is engaging as Bagley-Keene and it's not publicly
just
noticed.
like, okay, just then to put it for future discussion that you're.
Thank you, duly noted, and thank you. Appreciate your understanding of the Bagley-Keene requirements.
Regulations.
Yeah. Do I have any other public comment for potential future items on the agenda? Okay, moving on to item 14, committee members' recommendations for items for future advisory committee agenda items. And I think what we've usually done historically in the past is just start from the left, moving right, and give us any thoughts you might have.
Sure. I guess one of the things that was brought up in public comment earlier today in terms of cumulative training for all the way up through firearm training, that sounds like a pretty interesting and probably a better issue in terms of public safety. I understand that there's a cost associated with that, but the flip side would be the streamlining of the process, perhaps, and also the advantage to public safety. So I guess I'd like to request that be put on the future agenda.
Thank you.
I don't have anything.
I don't have anything.
Looking to probably the new ammunition restriction law, Prop 63, and how is that going to affect current firearm permit holders and applicants for firearm permits?
Thank you. Anything else?
I don't have anything, thank you.
So at this point, we're now to item 15, which is adjournment. I want to thank DCA staff again for all the work that they do in pulling this all together that we don't see behind the scenes, but because of their efforts, this runs so smoothly. I want to thank the committee members for giving again of their time, and I know that you come and participate at your own cost, and that is greatly appreciated. And I want to thank those members still here in the public who kind of lasted to the very end. So having said that, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
In a second.
Call the vote.
Simon Cruz,
Aye.
Marcel Egley, Matthew Lujan,
Aye.
Todd Inglis,
Aye.
Lynn Moorfield,
Aye.
Stan Perez.
Aye.
The motion passes 6-0. The meeting adjourned. Time is 2:47.